Okay, cool, epic.
All
What's the
right,
rundown? Go ahead. Never mind.
we're live now, dude. Um, Sorry for the hold up, guys. We had technical difficulties. I'm having internet issues. But yeah, we're all here. We're waiting for Lord Dark to be back. Anyway, welcome to episode 25 of Futurism Forever podcast. Tonight we're going to be reading and discussing the manifesto of the Futurist political party. Um, this is the group that ended up getting absorbed into the Fasci de Combattimento. So it's post World War One, and or yeah, post World War One, and it's an important proto-fascist text or an example of early fascism, or the kind of fascism that F.T. Marinetti would endorse what he was promoting. So yeah, it should be good. Let me introduce the panel. Tonight we have Evan Tobia of the National Reformation Party. We got Seamus.
American Reformation Party.
American Reformation Party. Sorry about that. We have Seamus of the Seamusite Fascisti. We've got Weaponized Goebbels of Third Position Radio. And we should have Lord Dark back, his co-host. There he is. He just dropped out again. So sorry for the shaky start. Alcaz hopefully will be back too.
Oh, seems to lost you. All right there, Joe.
I've never streamed from my phone before, so sorry for the shaky start. I'm not gonna touch anything. I'm going to let Lord Dark in. Lord Dark. So first, let's do introductions before we start reading. Lord Dark, can you mute when you're not talking? It'll be appreciated. So we had Evan and Seamus on for the necessity and beauty of violence. They're making their return. So Evan, how is the American Reformation Party going since we last talked, and what are your plans for 2022?
The American Reformation Front it's actually been really hectic since we last hopped in, but our plans for 2022, we've got an election campaign that we're running, House of Representatives down in Texas. We're looking forward to really well. We're planning on getting articles, podcasts, video channels, so over Odyssey, BitChute, and YouTube. We're going to get all that set up, revamp for the website, and a new method of operation that'll hopefully see us increase our size by about 10 times if we're looking at it properly. So it's looking to be a good year for us.
Okay. Good to hear it. Seamus, how is Seamusite Fascisti going? What are your plans for 2022?
Well, 2021 was an interesting time. We reached past 15,000 subscribers on the website, nearing now 20. We have now shifted into the phase 2 of our planning, back when we started. This means that we'll be engaging in more community activity. Currently slated in, we have a group of activists planning to engage in some community connectivity in the city of Leeds in Yorkshire. And then after that, we have some plans for some similar activities in the United States. We're looking forward to the year of 2022. Keep pushing the message,
Okay. And we have the Third Position Radio guys. They've had me on their podcast twice. Do you want to tell us about Third Position Radio? Promote yourselves to the FF audience. This is their first time on, so they're making their debut.
Yeah, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, this happened for once.
Well, I'm Goebbels. I'm a third position artist. I mainly make propaganda, although I do other stuff as well. And I also host Third Position Radio, little podcast that over at BitChute, where we just talk about current events. Mostly get off topic, but it's a fun time.
Yeah. So that's good. Yeah, that's Goebbels. Of course, the one and only Lord Dark, myself, included. Pretty much, I'm the one who runs the page on Twitter and the YouTube account also. pushing us, further and further, trying to make our podcast well known, in a sense.
Okay, yeah, you
Yeah, he
do
does most
the
like the PR stuff, and I take care of the I take care of more of the logistics, making art, editing videos, that kind
Yeah.
of thing.
yeah. It's a good podcast. I'd recommend both. Um, yeah, he's had me on twice, and they do it at like 1 a.m. for me, so I'm pretty drunk every time I'm on. But I've had a good time every time I'm on, and yeah, so it's a good quality program. I'd recommend it. So yeah, without further ado, I guess we'll start with the reading, if everyone's ready. So yeah, the Manifesto of the Futurist Political Party. This is post World War I. Marinetti's trying to convert the futurist movement into a political movement, and these are their 11 points. So yeah, we'll read through each point by point and discuss each point. Yeah, without further ado. So point 1. The Futurist Political Party, which we are founding today, wants an Italy that is both strong and free, no longer in servitude to its great past, to foreigners who are too much loved, and to priests who are too much tolerated. We want an Italy that is under no one's control, that is the absolute mistress of all her energies, and that is oriented towards her own great future. So, thoughts on point 1? It's definitely consistent
Well, it
with
sounds pretty solid so far.
Well, I can say, my opinion is, so far so great. Italy should be bound to no one. That's my opinion of it.
Yo.
Yeah, welcome back. I just read point 1, Alcaz. So yeah, the part
I would
we
say
want Italy that is under no one's control. What do you think he means by under no one's control? It sounds almost anarchistic, not like authoritarian.
I feel that the concept of the anarchist the anarchist understanding from the anarchist understanding of this kind of concept of revolution against the current standing state and entrance into some sort of its own national state, a very common theme amongst both the early writings of the futurists and of the fascists, including the Manifesto of October 5th, 1914, penned by the International Revolutionary Actions of the fascists.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think though it might change, this might change in the future. I think it portrays a very good image of what I notice a lot of times with more modern movements is this kind of shackling of the potential of a nation to its past, those outside of the nation, or the more, let's call it, spiritually influenced individuals who, while they may have the good of people's souls at heart, that same good might not always transfer over to the good of the nation. I think it portrays a very good example of, and this may change further on through their points, but a very good mixture of the refusal to be binded by the past, a willingness to have alongside but not be dominated by religion, and a willingness to move forward as a nation, regardless of those who are outside of the nation, regardless of what they say or how they feel about that nation's progress.
Yeah, I would agree with
Yeah,
that.
so you said this is after World War I, sorry?
Yeah, this is 1920, I believe.
1920. Okay, so you do the Italians. They within the last very short period of time they were unified. So I get a lot of vibes of anytime you read any literature for the time, like after the unification, it's this glorification of the Italian identity and its subservience to no one else, because you all know that Italy had been pretty much ruled over by other states since Rome. So I get a big vibe from that.
Yeah, Italy is still trying to figure out what it's going to become. It's still a young nation. There's a sense of Italianness, but it's very regional based. There's lots of division within Italy. So the Risorgimento kind of united Italy in a legal sense, but in a spiritual sense, it hasn't really come together yet. So, like, that's why futurists are about rejecting the past and, the classics in ancient Rome and all that. They want to build a new Italy that exceeds the greatness of ancient Rome. It's like a huge part of what futurism is and what fascism was, in my opinion. It's about completing the Risorgimento and making it a real spiritual, tangible thing, like an Italian identity that's brand new and completely removed from the past. Yeah, I've got a quick correction though. I said it. This is 1920. It's 1918 actually, so it's a little before that. So World War II has basically just ended. Or World War One has basically just ended, and Marinetti's trying to convert futurism into a political movement, not just an artistic movement. He has written earlier political manifestos before. I've done solo readings of the first, second, and third ones. He's kind of like carrying on those ideas here. But does anyone have anything they want to add on point one before we move on to point two? I'll take that as a no. I have a question. How did the Romanticism and Realism movements shape the Futurist movement? I would say that Futurism was a total rejection of Romanticism and Realism.
I always believed it came from the Cubist and modernist aspects of the artistic understanding.
Yeah, Cubism is a definite direct influence stylistically. They definitely went their own direction with it ideologically, though. There are important differences. Like, I'm pretty sure Picasso was a communist. He probably wouldn't agree with Marinetti's ultra nationalism or militarism, glorification of war, all that. Futurism is definitely unique amongst the modern art movements of the time because of the ultra nationalism. Like surrealists weren't like that, Dadaists weren't like that. Neither were Cubists. But yeah, they definitely took stylistic influences from those, and there's a lot of overlap between all these movements stylistically. But Romanticism and Realism, not so much. It would be a rejection of that. Hopefully that answers your question. Anyway, we'll move on to point two. Italy, sovereign, united, and indivisible. A revolutionary nationalism intent on the freedom, well-being, physical, and intellectual improvement, strength, progress, greatness, and pride of all the Italian people. So it's kind of picking up where point one left off. Revolutionary nationalism, intent on freedom, well-being, physical and intellectual improvement, strength, progress, greatness, and pride of all the Italian people. Thoughts on point two?
I think it just further goes to point to where you were heading at, where it's futurism and movements at the time were meant to help complete the I cannot pronounce that, the reorganization of Italy. That it was very much, this was intended to create from that legal unification a cultural and a spiritual unification while improving all the lives of the Italians, solely for the purpose and glorification of Italy itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Anyone else? Thoughts on point two?
Oh yeah, it really really picks up on the previous talking points, and it actually got more into the what I was bringing up about the Italian unification. So no, it's wonderful. Everything so far is as beautiful as I expected it to be.
Actually, if I might chime in again, there's an interesting thing, and it's a mixture of Italian ultra-nationalism found in futurist and fascist circles, as well as that idea of a revolutionary nationalism, where it's not just we love the nation as it is, it's we see the nation as it could be, and we're willing to basically upturn the entirety of what the nation currently is to see that Italy that is to be. And I think
a theme that is later echoed by Gentile in the Doctrine when he refers to the necessity of a populist state and everything, and the change from the old way is how fascism is not the nationalist state. That whole article that he put in.
Right, yeah. It's a very similar idea to that, where it's, there is
because
a
the
great love for
nationalist, right? He sees the state as a datum of history, right? The fascist, the futurist, right, saw it as an embodiment of spirit.
Right, exactly. It's very much this concept of I love the nation and the land, but I'm not tying myself down to what it was. I love it as it could be. And I think it's a very fascinating way to look at, not just through futurism, but in similar movements, a very fascinating way to look at a love for a nation. Because it's something you see a lot nowadays. If you love your nation, why would you want it to change? But it's exactly because the futurists then, Reformationists now, the reason we want things to change is because we love our nation, because we desire for it to be better, to be what it could be. And it's a very interesting worldview that I think too many people dismiss out of hand.
Yeah, I
Revolt
think
against intolerable conditions brought on by completely controllable means.
I think it's important to highlight the revolutionary aspect. Like, people think of nationalism and they think of something that's like ultra conservative and reactionary and trying to hold on to the status quo. But fascism is different in that it is revolutionary, and futurism as well is revolutionary. They're trying to establish a completely new idea of what a nation is or can be. They're trying to establish a completely new kind of nation, which does differentiate it from other forms of nationalism. And it's like unique to futurism and later on fascism.
And I think
there's
as well,
an interesting quote that
go ahead, Seamus.
Mussolini had. That was referenced in the Political and Social Doctrine of Fascism. That goes, yet the fascist state is unique, an original creation. It's not reactionary but revolutionary, in that it anticipates the solution of universal political problems.
There's this. It's this concept, I think, that's very innately tied to fascism and futurism's obsession with dynamism and youthful vigor and progress. This concept, not like the progress that we think of, that some people might think of now when they hear progress, they might immediately tie it to progressivism, but rather just the advancement of the nation, regardless of how that advancement must occur, even if it must occur through the total destruction of some of the old ways the nation handled itself. It's very much tied into that dynamism, that vigor, that youthful I'd almost call it passion, lust, rage, any number of those things that really ties together to the spirit that tied fascism and futurism in their early years together, even though they did have their separations.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a common misconception. People just call fascism right-wing authoritarianism, when it is incredibly revolutionary. And the main reason they always tie it to that is, well, the Nazis. But in Italy, it was a completely different thing. Men and women had rights in Italy that they, after Mussolini came to power, that they didn't have during the kingdom period.
Yeah.
No one really talks about that, though.
Fascist Italy was like very progressive in comparison to like liberal states that existed at the same time. Like compared to Britain or America, it was a lot more progressive and forward thinking and willing to adopt new ideas. Like everyone talks about like Marinetti and scorn for women and all that, but like he did support the suffragettes, and we'll get into that in points coming up. So I don't want to dwell on it too much just yet. Before we move on to point 3, first of all, everyone subscribe to Will to Power podcast. Nico is a new figure in like the YouTube dissident right scene, I guess. He calls what he does post-right or virtue socialism, I believe. He's a friend of Futurism Forever podcast. I've got an interview dropping on his channel soon. He asks, do you see any modern political movements that have shades of futurism within it? I'd say futurism forever is it. And we're not really a political movement. We're just a podcast and blog. So to answer simply, I'd say no. Unless someone knows something I don't. Anyone else want to take a crack at
Actually,
that
it's a
question?
question for you, Gio, just in relation to this. Due to some of the similarities, I know there is differences, but due to some of the similarities between fascism and futurism, at least in regard to some original thought that they shared, would you not say that there's slight shades of futurism within certain fascist movements of the day, or would you say that they've split too far apart at this point? They've kind of become their own unique identities instead of having that relatively shared situation that they both were birthed from.
I
Everyone,
consider myself both a futurist
yeah,
and a fascist. I see
that,
no
that, yeah,
separation.
yeah. I might be kind of dismissive. Seamus does identify as both. Do you want to elaborate on like the futurist aspects of the Seamusites?
Yeah, about to say both. Yeah, both here as
We
well. You
embody,
know.
we try to embody the cult of action in the youth, right? We don't seek the stagnation, the stoppages, right? It's very much a shared concept with the futurists. Even in their early, less political manifestos, more of they're describing their aesthetic, right? I find a lot of similarities between what we seek in the, I guess you could say, aesthetic and very visual route, like it was as a movement before World War One. The necessity of action, the cult of youth and speed and progress, right? Advancement.
Okay, that's fair. Anyone else, like, does anything come to mind as far as like strains of futurism in like existing nationalist or fascist movements? I think like a lot of them lean heavily towards, they decide to wrap their nationalism in a traditionalist framework most of the time, which is why
I
I don't
mean,
see eye to
Casa
eye with a
Pound,
lot of the existing groups right now.
Casa Pound describes its
Yeah,
youth wing as futurist, right? It has futurist clubs and
that is a good point. They actually have like a futurist wing of studentesco blocco studentesco. Sorry,
yeah,
um, were recently raided by the police or something. I saw like
yeah.
a clip of it. It's hard to understand what's going on because I don't actually speak Italian very well, but they all seem pretty angry. It seems pretty hectic. Um, I think Future or Casa Pound definitely embodies um, the futurist ethos in their nationalism and their take on 21st century fascism. So shout out to
And
Casa Pound.
I would make an argument that even though the Phalange, the more modern movements, such as FE Phalange, uh, they also exhibit many similarities with what you would consider futurism. They don't build themselves up on a past. They don't use Franco and his regime as some sort of example of themselves. They seek a totally different system in their own description. And they also, surround themselves with the cult of the youth, cult of the speed.
Okay, Eternal Mapper wants to know, did the Phalange ever embrace futurism at all, or did they have their own thing?
I feel it's
Um,
multifaceted. It's hard to say that they embraced any specific artistic aesthetic. I think that they were very broad because the initial Phalange era and Balgato, they had very, they based themselves on some tradition, but then you get into the more radical Phalangists and whatnot, and the Phalangistias of the Franco era, the youths and whatnot. They find much more radical, much more revolutionary aspect, the abandonment of conservatism and the tradition and everything. The whole Phalange without the P movement. I find that's a very important thing to refer to.
okay. Um, yeah, to answer that, like, I don't think the Phalange ever like formally embraced futurism. I think they were kind of their own thing. Like when I was doing the Proclamation to the Spaniards by F.T. Marinetti, I was trying to find like examples of Spanish futurism, and I had to go with Cardoso, who's not Spanish, he's Portuguese, because like he is a futurist, but he's Portuguese, not Spanish.
Iberian futurism.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know of any Spanish futurists. They definitely had avant-garde movements, but they're more prominent in like surrealism or like cubism. Not really Dadaism so much. But as far as futurism goes, not too much. Anyway, Will to Power says, thanks, man. Your interview should drop early next week. Okay, great. I look forward to listening back to it. I think it was a pretty good conversation. So, and he has a good channel. He's probably more right leaning than I am, or Futurism Forever generally is, but he does quality content and he's worth checking out. So salute. I'll move on to point 3 now. The patriotic education of the proletariat, the fight against illiteracy, road networks, the construction of new roads and railroads, obligatory secular primary schooling that is legally enforced, the abolition of many useless universities and of classical education, obligatory technical instruction in the workplace, obligatory and legally enforced gymnastics, sport, and military education in the open air, schools promoting courage and the Italian spirit. Thoughts on point 3?
Well, right there, you get,
new infrastructure.
Hey, go ahead, sorry.
It reminds me of the Reform of Education by Gentile a little bit. He wants to instill a sense of Italianness in young Italian people who are like school age. To summarize, do you guys have any thoughts on point 3?
I think it's a really good reinforcement once again of that futurist fascist ideal of youthful vigor, that utilization of the youth not just as the future proponents of the ideology, but the future manifestations of the nation itself. So in this, you see, not only are you strengthening their technical instruction, allowing them to further advance the sciences of the nation, but you also have a physical instruction, making the future generation strong, and the utilization of political power to make a nation where those strengths can be best put to use for the nation as a whole through the promotion of infrastructure, literacy, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I would agree with all that.
And this kind of action, the patriotic education, right, that kind of system would be seen in fascism that would come after, the merger between the futurist political movement and the fascios, right? You would see the implementation of the Gentilian reform of education, followed by a more patriotic teaching of history and that kind of conception as well.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, it goes into, like, the whole idea that education should be more than just, fancy book learning. It should be an education of the spirit and the body, something that, you don't see a bit today.
Yeah, he mentions he wants to abolish many useless universities and classical education, which is something that he butted heads with Gentile on. Gentile thought the classics were important, and he definitely did not want to drop the classics from the curriculum. Marinetti did. It's something they did not see eye to eye on. What do you guys think the importance of the classics is in like modern education?
I feel that it's important that there be some basis. If you're understanding something as complex as philosophy or whatnot, it's good to have the classics as some sort of old basis of your educational platform, right? But I believe that the philosophy should always be moving forwards, right? It should always be shifting to meet the times, and it's definite that figures like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, they could never come to the conclusions and the concepts that we would see in the modern day, right? So it's hard to apply classical learning in that kind of sense to a much more spiritual, philosophical understanding of learning that would come through things like the Gentilian reform. And it makes sense why Marinetti would want it removed entirely. It does.
Yeah, it's like, I think from Marinetti's perspective, like in a country like Italy where you're surrounded by ancient ruins and like museums and Roman sculptures and all that kind of stuff, like the weight of the past is like slowing us down and preventing us from reaching our full potential. You're almost like Sisyphus, like pushing a boulder up a hill or something. Whereas,
exactly, you'll never be able to reclaim an ancient glory.
If you just forget about the boulder and walk up the hill, like you'll accomplish that a lot quicker. And like
there's later on, and I don't want to stay on it too long because I know we'll cover it whenever we get to it. But he makes mention of the destruction of museums, statues, the culture of statues. I think is the explicit statement within this manifesto at a later point. And I think, like you were saying, that very Sisyphean task of rolling the boulder up the hill, you're never going to do it, so drop the boulder. I think that, compared between, the more maintain the classics and abandon them, I would say I lean more towards abandoning them. I think there does need to be a through line of philosophical foundation, right? If you're teaching philosophy, if you're teaching, that kind of knowledge and understanding, which does come, it's a historical through line. You can see where one idea was then developed by another individual, so on and so forth. But I think that any amount of the classics which are detrimental to that progression, which I think there can be, almost certainly, I think those absolutely should be removed. That what should remain of the classics is that which helps further push that concept that we are a constantly moving, a constantly adapting, constantly evolving nation, a constantly evolving philosophy, a constantly evolving identity, such that you remove all those classics, which is not help further indicate this kind of national idea of progression, of dynamism, of growth, and of renewal. And I think there could have been a very good. I think there could have been a very good synthesis, or not synthesis, but rather a very good mixture between removal and maintaining of those classics, depending upon the nature of it.
Yeah, I mean, hold on to what's useful and get rid of the stuff that's no longer relevant or out of date, or probably like a middle ground should be found, which I think kind of is what fascism ended up doing. There wasn't their architecture, for example, did have a lot of nods to ancient Rome, and like they did kind of maintain Roman aesthetics to a certain extent.
I mean, to a certain extent, although they did support a lot of futurist building initiatives. If you go and look at Eritrea as a good example, they have a lot of beautiful futurist constructed buildings, a lot of very, very interesting concepts that were put forward there. And I find it was a very beautiful architectural program that the Italians put forward for the futurist initiative in places like Eritrea.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And Ethiopia. The buildings there are still there in some cases and still look absolutely fantastic despite their age.
And just to answer a question real quick from Totally Not an NIL, it's not necessarily that, well, at least from my end, I'm not advocating for the destruction of history, but for that which is to be, taught within curriculum, which is paid for through the nation and is a utilization of the nation's resources, have it be that which is pertinent to the nation, towards its growth and its development, to leave it available for study for those who desire to, but have what is being pushed directly from the nation to be conductive to its end goal, to that national goal, which both fascism and futurism develop themselves into. The idea of utilizing dynamism and vigor to push it forward.
Absolutely. It's not about erasing history at all, right? The futurist wishes to ignore history. He doesn't need it. It's not important to the futurist mindset to care about this history. It's very Manifesto in its understanding. I don't give a damn about the history. I don't give a damn, right? Move on. That's what I see the futurist understanding of history as at least.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Marinetti wanted to completely get rid of it. He wanted to tear down a lot of the old monuments, even like he didn't want the constant reminder of Italy's past.
That's not, it still exists in books and records and other things, right? You're not destroying history. You're just building atop. You're building on top of where it once stood.
If Marinetti had his way, it would exist in library. Well, he wanted to get rid of libraries too, so it's like he did kind of want to just get rid of history altogether.
He also wanted to destroy the
I
syntax.
feel like jumping off the whole idea of the synthesis, that's what Italy tried to do, was make the synthesis. And that really comes more down to practical means than philosophic means. Italy wanted empire again. Now that we're unified, we have all our shit together. And what's the best excuse for that? Oh, reclaiming Roman land.
I don't feel that
Really?
Italy actually wanted empire. There's a lot of good books on this. It's been propagated by modern scholars that the fascist Italian government was Mare Nostrum and seeking its empire again. No, that's factually incorrect. If you look at books like Behold Our New Empire and A Woman in the Abyssinian War, the Italians never had an intent to annex these lands, an intent to expand this so-called empire of theirs. What they sought was the fair and equal representation of their people within the country that they had, Eritrea and Somalia. Well, that was at threat by the slave raiders and etc. that came from.
Well, I'm not talking about Africa. I'm not talking about Africa. I'm talking about Greece and I'm talking about Greece and Albania and the chunk of France they took.
Yep. There's perfectly reasonable explanations of these things too. If you look at the explanation of Italian foreign policy as in the speech of 1934 to the League of Nations by Mussolini, you see that he describes the necessity of Italy receiving its promises from World War I, which was a set of islands from Greece, a few pieces things from Turkey, stuff like that. And the occupation zone in France wasn't meant for annexation; it was meant as a means of economic necessity, sort of like how France occupied the Rhineland in 1919 to 1930. It wasn't meant to be a permanent annexation of land.
Well, nothing ever meant to be permanent. Everyone will make the excuse for it, to be for peace. You see how it is, though. Britain's conquests are always for peace, for the ending of slavery. Then they keep it. And that's practical. You took it. You deserve it. But, let's be honest, they were going to keep it if they had won.
I don't think so. I don't think they would have kept everything. I think they would have kept the islands they were promised from World War One, the lands that they were promised from World War One that was never given to them. I believe that they would have taken that. I think they would have annexed that, absolutely. But I don't think they would have taken most of Greece like they did in the temporary occupation area. I think they would have released Ethiopia as they had planned to with their foreign policy. This stuff that wasn't publicly accessible, wasn't public speeches. This was just policy documents that they had been circulating throughout the government.
Seamus, unrelated question, but do you have headphones you could clip in or something?
I'm actually wearing headphones.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of background noise.
Yeah, he's got a T9000 in his room there. Just
okay.
Get out of there, man!
It sounds like you're on a military base or something, and there's helicopters flying over top you. If there's
I didn't know you were calling us from Ukraine.
Cool, but yeah, just wondering what's going on there. Anyway, we do have some audience questions. So Eternal Mapper asks, so I heard the Soviets also embraced a sense of futurism. Was that the same as what FT Marinetti preached, or a completely different type of futurism? I would recommend checking out our recent podcast on Mayakovsky, which he's a really important Russian futurist figure. I'd say there are differences between Russian futurism and Italian futurism. They have their own tradition of cubism in Russia. The immediate influences are different. But yeah, I kind of think futurism is not unique to fascism. It can attach itself to any form of revolutionary politics. In Italy, fascism made sense. In Russia, Bolshevism made sense. But they ended up getting thrown under the bus by Stalin. So it was short-lived, but there is definitely a lot of great Russian futurist work. Mayakovsky was our first.
About it before.
Yeah, Mayakovsky was our first foray into that subject. We do plan on getting more into it in the future, but our main focus is on Italian fascism, on Futurism Forever. We're not oblivious to. We're not oblivious to Russian futurism, though. it's similar, but there are differences. And yeah, hopefully that answers your question. You've talked to Scythe before. You weren't on the Maya. I'm talking to Seamus. On the Halloween special, which we don't have up anymore, but you did
I think
talk to
I thought we talked
Scythe.
about before that as well, about Russian futurists and their the ultimate end at the hands of the Stalinist purges.
Yeah, we have mentioned it in passing. I know you talked to Scythe on the Halloween special at length for like an hour. You guys kind of went back and forth on Russian futurism. That episode, that stream isn't up anymore, though. I take the drunken streams down after a while because, I mean, they're fun in the moment, but they're not like required viewing or anything. It's mostly just us shooting the shit and
that was
answering audience questions.
I'm kind of mad I didn't jump in. Like I saw it. Like I saw it and I was like, I gotta jump into this. It was over right when I saw it.
I remember me and that Mexican guy had like a 30-minute argument over the origins of Halloween.
Oh yeah, I think that was Artemio.
He was arguing about how the Day of the Dead was cooler than Halloween.
Yeah, it's less commercialized. That was a fun night. I had fun that night. But yeah, it's no longer up. We do have the Mayakovsky episode up though. That's not going to be taken down. So, and we had Scythe back on to talk about Russian futurism in a more formal setting. So yeah, I'd recommend that episode of FF if you want a deep dive on Russian futurism. So secular Quranism wants to know, how about restoring the patriarchy? This is a futurist channel. We don't give a shit about restoring the past or your patriarchy. I think just be realistic. Women are not going to go back into the kitchens again. If they want to, they can, but I'm not really super triggered about women in the workplace.
Fascism means freedom for British women poster time.
Exactly. Like, yeah. The actual fascist movements.
The feminist Congress in Rome in 1923.
Yeah, the actual fascists did not have these kind of like regressive views on gender relations and shit. I think it's something that weighs the movement down and limits its potential.
There is
alienating 50% of the population.
Is not a good idea, exactly. I mean, I think there is something to be stated for kind of saying, there's nothing wrong with, more traditional roles in regards to if you desire to do it. I don't think there should be any put down, and the capacity should be there for mothers to be able to stay and raise children and all that stuff. But it shouldn't be compulsory. It shouldn't be something that is mandated.
No. I mean,
mandated.
It should be
any organization that is entirely based themselves on putting women back in the kitchen is an incel front. Let's be honest, and you should really just know that's how things are now.
Either that or a hyper traditionalist movement, which also is
ultra reactionary.
Yeah, which is equivalently pointless in the modern day and age. It's simply not going to happen unless through incredibly violent force, and none of them have the manpower or resources necessary to enforce it.
Yeah, I would agree. Be a little more flexible.
It's just ridiculous. That'd be like the new like outlawing. Like, how outlawing anything nowadays is almost impossible. Weed, alcohol, anything else. Doing that to women again is just so impossible. Like on any level. Maybe in like some Sharia country, that it's already in place. Yeah, that's possible, but not in America or in the West at all. The genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah,
you can't take things away from you. That's not how it works.
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, it's extremely difficult to do. It's messy.
Yeah, exactly.
You're gonna purposely alienate 50% of the population. Your movement does actually have to offer something to women too. Otherwise they're not gonna support your movement, and you're gonna end up with a bunch of like insulated online spaces that are like borderline gay. Because it's just socially awkward dudes communicating with each other. I think women are important to the movement, and we should open ourselves up to them a little more. Try and like make it fascism or futurism or whatever your form of radical politic is attractive to them, and we want to include them. at FF anyways.
You should. You will.
Yeah.
You will fail if you don't. That's just the truth. You will
Yeah.
fail if you don't.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. Quranism asks, classics are the connection of the current generation with its past. The classics are the antithesis of dumb political correctness.
I disagree. I completely disagree. The concept of political correctness doesn't come from a rejection of the past. It comes from a sense of shutting down the alternate avenues of progress. It's a neoliberal trick in order to stopgag radical movements that are going to be disagreeing with it. I mean, that's quite simple. It has nothing to do with classics. You know, a neoliberal, could just as easily justify his regime with Plato as a fascist could, as a corporatist could, right? It's nonsense that you would claim that the classics are somehow the antithesis of political correctness. It's censorship. That's all it is. It's always existed. It's not like it's new.
Yeah.
But what would you call the Roman programs, right? Where they shut down the speed when a dictator came in, like Sulla or Caesar, and they would issue programs that would shut down their opposition. They'd kill dozens of them, right? It's the same concept. They disagreed with the political power, and thus they were dead.
All right, moving on. I think Bald is making a joke about all the background noise coming from Seamus. Bastard noise
I
or
don't like my sentient AI in the background.
Yeah. We gotta stop bullying Skynet. It's gonna come for us.
yeah. I
He literally
used
is
a
living in
bastard
like
noise.
the lame computer room.
Yeah. I used a bastard noise song for one of my intros. I think for we renounce our symbolist masters. Vald is like my power violence buddy in the chat, so I get the joke, but to explain it to others. We'll return to audience questions, but I want to continue with the text itself. So I'll read point 4 and then we'll return to audience question. I'll try and answer them all like by the end of the stream, but we've been going for almost an hour and we've only gotten through 3 points. So point 4, the transformation of parliament through the equal participation of industrialists, agrarians, engineers, and businessmen in the government of the country. The minimum age limit for deputies to be reduced to 22 years. Reduction of the number of lawyer deputies who are always opportunists, and teacher deputies who are always ultra-conservative. A parliament that is free of weaklings and scoundrels. Abolition of the Senate. If this rational and practical parliament fails to yield positive results, we shall abolish it altogether and bring in a technocratic government without parliament, a government composed of 20 technocrats elected by universal suffrage. We shall replace the Senate with a supervisory assembly, made up of 20 young men under the age of 30, elected by universal suffrage. And instead of a parliament full of incompetent orators and irrelevant academics, moderated by a Senate full of has-beens, we shall have a government of 20 technocrats, stimulated by an assembly of under 30-year-olds. There would be equal participation of all Italian citizens in government, equal and direct universal suffrage for all citizens, both men and women, on a broadly based list system, using proportional representation. So some very radical and progressive points there. First of all, there's a glorification of youth. Why do you think there's an emphasis on more young people in government from the futurists?
Exactly.
Because young people have
the
revolutionary energy and
it's just
all
natural
the fresh new ideas.
Will lean towards conservatism. It just is. They will generally become more conservative over the length of their lifetime.
I mean, it's also the matter of where
it's true.
at 22, with the education system that this manifesto has promoted, these youthful members of parliament would be newly minted out of essentially the factory of futurism that would become the education system, invigorated by political thought, invigorated by dynamism, invigorated by dynamism, invigorated by this complete rejection of all that has held Italy back, creating a almost purely advancement-focused new blood into the political system to help push it ever forwards.
Absolutely. Another interesting thing about
well,
this,
that's like the opposite of like we have everywhere. Everywhere, we have older people, running things. And I mean, like, you don't even have to point that far to find some incompetent old bag who's been there longer than most people have been alive. Why shouldn't the people who go out and fight and die for your country run it? It only makes sense.
Well, I mean,
soldier
it's entirely,
socialism.
yeah, it's entirely based around the continuing longevity of the system that they desire to keep. I mean, and once again, I'm going to go a little bit further into the manifesto, but I won't stick to it because we'll cover it in the next point. The manifesto explicitly states the only religion of Italy is the Italy of tomorrow. For her we shall fight and maybe die without caring overmuch what forms of government must necessarily follow the medieval theocracy after its final demise. The purpose of the Futurists wasn't to create a political state that would be constant and maintain itself through stability. It was to maintain a culture, a nationality, a spirit of continual progress, of dynamism, of vigor. It didn't matter if the political system entirely changed, so long as it changed by the same vectors that futurism desired to see implemented within Italy. It was never supposed to be a stable system, at least not in the sense of a stable political system, more a stable system for Italy, not necessarily of its politics.
Another interesting thing that this brings up
that's
is
really forward thinking,
is the syndicalist organization of its
Go
parliament.
ahead.
Right? When he discusses in point 4 the transformation of parliament into equal participation of industrialists, agrarians, engineers, and businessmen, he's referring to specifically a syndicalized structure of government, something you would see in the Charter of Caricano, aka Fiume, and even earlier with George Sorel and the Profumo Circle, right? You would see these kinds of concepts be promoted as what you would understand later to become fascism, right? The construction of state around the syndicate, around the corporate pod, right? And that's interesting that the Futurist Manifesto directly references that in the 4th point at the very beginning.
I'm digging the background noise, man. I'm kind of vibing to it.
I know, right? It sounds like you're like recording this, like riding on top of a Roomba.
Seamus is
right beside a mag rail, yeah.
Seamus is getting abducted by aliens right now as we speak.
I gotta keep to it, They seek the knowledge. I gotta.
Yeah. So, sorry, I do.
But like, I thought it was I don't know, a bit too, the way he explained it, a bit too democratic for my liking, because I prefer more of a direct down kind of style of thing. But I know fascism is democracy in its purest form. There's no argument about that. I just don't think national democracy works. Maybe on like a provincial level and a city level, obviously, but on a national level, not so much.
It's not a national level. If you read it, it's very clearly in a syndicate level. You're voting within your specific blocks of education. If you're an industrialist, an agrarian, an engineer, a businessman, right? You're running in those pods. You're not running as I'm from this location, I'm running under this party. You're running as I'm a businessman, or I'm an industrialist, I'm a worker who's worked a coal mine for the last 30 years, or rather 15 since 22, for the past 15 years, and now seek a job in leading this government forward, right? So it's not a national election per se, it's a syndicalized election, something you would see implemented in the Chamber of Deputies in the 1930s in Italy.
I still think it presents itself just by the nature of more democratic institutions. It presents itself to a form of corruption that can be based around personal popularity rather than merit. I think that if there is to be such thing as electoral, it needs to be limited by the merit of those and the capacity to run. But I think for the system that it does present, that sort of suffrage isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't agree with it, but I can't necessarily say that I find it to be as abhorrent as I find, say, American representative democracy today.
Yes, 2 senators per state.
2 senators per state, both chosen by popularity contest with no amount of actual required merit or required.
Listen, man, if I have $500,000, I can become a senator.
Honestly, yeah, and it's ridiculous. But this isn't.
I don't
This
even
is
need to run for
Good.
Senate. I can just buy a senator.
This isn't a bash America section right now. I mean, I'm happy to do it. There's something.
Not to say it's really hard not to bash America if we're talking about modern politics.
I'm just saying, I can buy an American senator, right?
I mean, but I will say, I do really agree with that kind of syndicated idea that if you're going to have any form of government, there needs to be representative from the sectors of society that make it run. Like they said, industrialists, agrarians, engineers, businessmen, etc.
Yeah, a doctor to run the healthcare, a lawyer to run the law, right? That kind of concept is a meritocratic concept that seems to be wildly ignored nowadays for popularity contests.
Well, because it's the whole thing.
Oh yeah, like listen, I'm a rich lawyer. Now I should run the state.
It's the whole thing of direct representation, right? We don't vote for people to represent us who are like us. We vote for people to represent us by region. It's regional democracy. And by its inherent value, it will always be corrupt. This does help to kind of alleviate that, but I still think it doesn't go far enough. Personally, in my opinion, pure meritocracy, if it is manageable, which I think it is with proper systems of support, would be what is necessary to help alleviate some of the corruption that you see in governments all around the world, from oligarchies to pure democracies.
That's absolutely true. I mean, there's always going to be some form of corruption that can exist. It's all about curating a mindset of zeitgeist that prevents that corruption from manifesting in the people that run that state, right?
Exactly. Or more specifically,
you can't get rid of corruption in total.
Absolutely. You can. If you're an idealist, idealist philosophy, if you believe in idealist philosophy, you absolutely can eliminate corruption as long as you pursue a zeitgeist, a mindset, or a Volkist, I guess would be more appropriate, a people's mindset that alienates that sort of corruption, that completely attacks the concept of personal gain, right? An economy based on collective interest, right? That's what you need.
There's
people who are willing to sacrifice everything willingly to stay at the reins of government.
There's a term bandied around a lot.
I think that would help, but
it's economy and politics towards national goal. It's not really a term; it's kind of a phrase where the methods by which, and just an example, the methods by which things are exported, imported, sold, and exchanged are all geared. You take the entire economic system and you gear it towards the accomplishment of national goals, whatever that goal might be. So you take the economic sector of society and turn it towards national productivity. Let's say the nation wants to accomplish a massive infrastructure project. Within funds and transmissions and exchanges that would occur within the nation would go towards that objective. A similar thing occurs. And Seamus, you and I might differ here a little bit. I'm just unsure because we haven't actually talked policy in quite some time. Of where if you have a purely meritocratic system of advancement, where there is no election, it's purely through a recording of merit gained by the individual to progress or regress up and down the power structure of whatever sector of society you're representing. If you consider as merit those actions which help the nation, help the community, help the region, and are productive, and take as a demerit that which negatively affects the region, the nation, or positively affects only the self at the expense of others, you can make a system of advancement which directly combats corruption through its very institutions.
You can. I don't disagree at all, right? A completely meritocratic structure is a great idea in its concept, but then again, you're removing a people's choice immediately, right? It's something that would ideally come much later down in the pipeline of a construction of a nation, where you would slowly weed away the necessity for popular contests between meritocratic candidates. So that you would no longer need that. So you would get to that pure meritocracy. Because if you immediately remove the people's choice to exert a choice, right, whether it be by plebiscite, whether it be by local election in their local union or syndicate, right, then you immediately remove their ability to voice their concerns via a vote, right? And that causes issues in the immediate aftermath.
I think that only comes into consideration if the objective of meritocracy is, or rather, if the if the perception of meritocracy is the rejection of choice. I would argue that it absolutely can be argued that meritocracy is providing pure choice to the people. As in, if they desire to accomplish something, all they must do is accomplish, right? So there is
Yeah,
there
you
is
have to build that
there is
concept.
no
You have to build that
right. You have to
bulky,
build the concept, of course,
right?
But
And
there's
just as
no
equally,
there's
you
no
could build a
restriction.
concept.
There's no restriction upon the people in regards to their capacity to change the direction of society as a whole, at least within their sector, or even more so, depending on their ability to organize, because it is solely left in the hands of the individuals to yield results, to allow them to advance and make the changes they desire. It's not democratic in the sense that there's not election, but the progress of the nation is maintained through purely the choice and action of the people.
I don't think
I would
that
argue it's
democracy,
more purely democratic.
I
At least in
would
a
also
general
argue that
sense.
democracy doesn't need elections, right? I don't think it does. I think that they're useful in curating a popular consensus. People agree then that they have all chosen a candidate, right? And I think it should be from a meritocratically selected pool of candidates, but I believe that that choice should still exist. And you should build a concept, a belief system, an idea, right, a Volkgeist, that the corruption and individualistic aspects of life are to be hated, right? To be rejected and outcast, right? Because they are damaging to the creation of the state, to your syndicate, to your people, right? Thus, you would no longer need to worry about so-called, the so-called corruption issues of a possibly voting-based democratic institution, because the people who are in it, right, the people who make up that institution, don't believe that corruption is an option, right? That's no longer a thought process that goes through their head.
And it's more specifically as well, it's the creation of that mindset within those who are running and those who do advance the country through the utilization of their merit to rise in position, that corruption is directly antithetical to the maintaining of position. It needs to become you cannot be. It needs, the objective would be create a system in which corruption directly hampers your capacity to grow, your capacity to advance. It would need to become where corruption in modern day societies is utilized as a method of either financial or intimidational progress. Those things would work in opposite to the way they do now, where there would be no progress through them, rather only regression.
Yeah, once again, it comes down to a philosophical issue, right? With idealism, you have to either accept that the people, that the mind, that the nurture of a person is superior to the nature, right? Or you end up with the materialist argument that everybody can become corrupt, right? That's what I think it boils down to in the end, is whether how far on the idealism you're willing to lean, right?
Well, I mean, anyone can really become corrupt, at least.
Yeah, I don't mean to make this. I don't mean to continue on for this for 45 minutes, Gio.
Yeah,
it's a good argument, but I don't think we're gonna there's clearly a difference.
It could be its own video.
Opinion on this issue. Yeah, exactly. I think we spent enough time on that. We got some people triggered in the audience. You guys want to erase history? What the fuck is wrong with you people? Are you kidding me? Most fascists were proud of their history.
No, Gio. You have to say it right. It's most fastest were proud of their history.
Well, I'm correcting. I assume that was autocorrect or just a typo. Such as fascists think it's a lot of people. I agree with Bald on this one. It is classic. Toss it into the pit. Sacrifice it like the Aztecs. If it's true, it will return. Me no slave. I think that's a good response. I don't really have anything to add. I just want to acknowledge what's going on in the chat. They're carrying on this. We're not going to address all of it. Any other genuine questions? You guys sound like liberals. Yeah, that's a common fucking argument that we get. Futurism is indistinguishable from progressive liberalism because we also want to tear down monuments and shit. And we're kind of progressive. We're not butthurt about women or I think you guys are reactionaries. You're not truly revolutionaries. To the trad fags in the audience, I think we have people on the panel who lean more trad than I do. Evan puts a lot of emphasis on Catholicism.
Just Christianity, not Catholicism.
Okay, all right. He's personally Catholic. and I'm sympathetic
Not.
to that. Like, all right, sorry if I.
No, it's
assumed-
fine. It's fine. This is the fifth
Yeah.
time probably in like 3 days I've been called Catholic, and I'm Protestant planning
Just
on
embrace it.
transitioning to Orthodox.
Okay, all right. All right. So
I just think it's funny.
I would fucking
you're
cry if
Mexican,
someone called me
Italian.
Catholic. I'm
so-
gonna be
Okay,
real
yeah,
dumb.
fair enough. There's a good percentage
I-
in terms of
yeah.
heritage that I would be Catholic.
Yeah, I just kind of assumed. My bad.
Even if you go Orthodox, you'd be an Orthodox Catholic. So
Yeah, I mean,
Orthodox is a
along
different
with
rabbit
people
hole.
who are- I can get along with people who are like, more traditionalist. I'll be respectful, but I mean, it's not really what we do
And
at
my thing is, I
Futurism
understand the
Forever.
disagreement, and I like as much as there are some traditional things that I do hold to. I'm firmly of the belief that it's not a regression towards those things. It's a utilization of that tradition as a springboard for progression. I don't think all things that are inherently traditional are opposed to progress, but if all you attempt to do is revert to that, you're dooming yourself to never advance. It's kind of a I've heard it be said
We are
in some
feminist.
conversations that it's a progressive traditionalism. I'm not really sure if I'd agree with that, but that seems to be the consensus I get when I tend to talk about my ideals in that regard.
Okay, secular Quranism says they sound like feminists with an
We are.
explanation.
I
point. That's right. We're feminists, and
I am. 100%.
You're right. We're here to defeat the patriarchy and all that.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
I
you're.
am 100%. This is a serious statement. I am.
And I think you
There's no
are a homo, so let's move on. I take this like confrontational approach to comments. I don't know. I mean, if these are futurists and it seems like some of them want to smash the past, what foundation are you going to build on? It's like trying to build a house without a foundation. That's retarded.
No, no. The foundation is what we curate it to be.
I want to address a more recent comment.
We're pouring our own foundation, okay?
We establish our own foundation because
Well, I
we're
do something.
revolutionary.
I do agree, secular Quranism with his most recent comment, progressive traditionalism. It's retarded sounding, but that's what I've heard sometimes.
Islam is doing a good job kicking our ass.
Who's our ass?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
Like I have no dogs in the game. If we lose Afghanistan, that's not my problem. That's the the global homo government's problem, not mine.
That's a neoliberal invasion, bro. I'm not looking for. We're not preaching. I don't know. Revolutionary. I'm not there to convert the Afghanis.
Yeah, no.
all right. The comments are mostly just secular Quranism and this not Naneo guy whining. I'm gonna stop addressing you guys. If we have like new voices in the chat, we'll go back to comments. We should get back to the
Also,
points.
Danielle is discarded because they have an enemy profile picture. So
Yeah, so like how trad are you really? I mean, you're watching
that's
Japanese
like a half-naked elf woman in your PFP. There.
animation of strange elf women and all kinds of degenerate shit. I take the Miyazaki approach. Anime is degenerate. It's all trash. Watch Porco Rosso and stop being a geek in comment sections. This is a futurist channel, right? Like, we are kind of progressive. We aren't conservative or traditionalist. We include conservatives and traditionalists on the panel sometimes, and like,
of course, it's good to have a plurality of voices.
Yeah,
Right, exactly.
a chance to push back. It's not one-sided, but like, I didn't start the channel to promote traditionalism. I think it's dead weight and it holds us back. That's my perspective. That's Futurism Forever's perspective. It is what it is.
I really would be interested, not right now, but just later on down the line, just having a talk with you, Gio, maybe even a podcast about it. The differences between your view on it and my view on it. I really would be interested in that.
Okay, I'd be down. A discussion, not like a debate. I don't.
Right, exactly. Just just some friendly talk.
Yeah, I don't have the temperament for debates. I'm hot-blooded Italian, and I don't know. It is what it is. But yeah, we should get back to the text itself. We kind of went off the rails there a bit. So point 5, substitution of the present rhetorical quiescent anti-clericalism by an actively violent and resolute anti-clericalism. so as to rid Italy and Rome of their medieval theocracy, which can find an appropriate country in which to go and slowly wither away. Our anti-clericalism is total and uncompromising and constitutes the basis of our political program. It admits of no half measures nor accommodations, demanding total abolition of the ecclesiastical system. Our anti-clericalism wishes to rid Italy of its churches, its priests, its friars, its nuns, its madonnas, its candles, and its bells. The only religion is the Italy of tomorrow. For her we shall fight and maybe even die without caring overmuch what forms of government must necessarily follow the medieval theocracy after its final demise. So point five is clearly very anti-Catholic, anti-Christian. Again, Marinetti sees it as dead weight that's holding Italy back. I don't know. I expect that to be kind of a controversial point.
I don't care.
I mean,
okay.
my thing is, like
brother, God's kingdom's in heaven. He's after death, and it doesn't really matter what tapestries and tappings you put on earth. You can't make it any more holy. God will judge us all.
And I could go off on a rant about how it's very functional as a vector of unity and all that jazz. But this is a futurist manifesto, right? I mean, I'd be going into Reformationism and some of its intricacies, and now's not really the time for that. I will say I disagree with most of this personally, but I do think the part that comes after censor, the only religion is the Italy of tomorrow. For her we shall fight and maybe die without caring overmuch for what forms of governments must necessarily follow the medieval theocracy after its final demise. I think, not in a religious sense, but kind of in a, like what Seamus was saying, kind of a people's spirit, a people's mentality of this kind of, not a religion or a pseudo-religion, but kind of this nearly or almost religious dedication to the nation and the nation as it could be. That's something I absolutely identify with, and I think it's very good for any movement that considers itself revolutionary, and still cares about the nation and is not an international movement. I think it's very important to have that almost religious, pseudo-religious kind of dedication to the nation to the insert name of nation here of tomorrow. The nation, as I say a lot when I'm talking with my members, or what I'm saying a lot in the articles, the America that is to be.
Yeah, was it Mussolini or Gentile who said that like fascism is like a religious conception?
Gentile. You
Yeah,
are
I
a
believe it was
fascist in
Gentile.
every walk of life.
That's
You're
what
a
I
fascist
thought.
in every walk of life. Not
Yeah,
just at the polls, but also at the newspaper, also in the on your walks in the daily. You're a fascist everywhere.
It's a total conception of life, a religious conception of life. Even I think what Marinetti says in point five is consistent with that. Initially, Mussolini was also very anti-clerical.
He put up the facade.
I think he was anti-clerical, but he saw the practicality of it. The Catholic Church was a unifying factor for Italy, and you gotta utilize it.
The first time he ran in 1920, he ran on a platform that was very similar to this. Marinetti actually co-wrote the original fascist manifesto.
Mussolini remained very anti-clerical even into later life. The issue was that he had to work with the church in order to prevent some kind of revolution or counter-revolution from the Christian democratic parties and whatnot.
Exactly, that's what I was getting at. When he ran on this kind of platform,
he threw Evola at the church. He was like, "Listen, man, you don't want to work with us? I'll work with Evola here, and we'll adopt his Hinduist paganism."
Yeah, when he ran on this kind of platform, though, he got like 1% of the vote. So he took a more pragmatic approach after that and made compromises with the church, with the bourgeoisie, with like conservatives, with more reactionary elements. And that's just real politics. I don't think he ever would have seized power without doing that.
Even Engelbert Dollfuss, the famous clerical fascist, he even in 1933, he wrote a small article that was published in the Vaterland Front newspaper, and it read something along the lines. I don't have it on me exactly, so I can't give you the exact quote. But paraphrasing is that he was like, religion is a tool. It is a tool that we will use in order to bring about the effective change of the Austrian state into what we envisioned it as the total conception of the cooperative state. Right. So to him, his Catholicism was a tool. It was a means to achieve control over the population in a much softer way. Right. No need for black shirts.
And I think it's also important to realize is that just because you see something as it is, I mean, because ultimately, when it comes to politics, religion is a tool. Like, and as a religious person, like I understand that. It's recognizable. It's like I said before. It's very much a tool utilized to unify, to help facilitate group identity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But even if it is a tool, that does not deny belief in it. It doesn't deny the capacity to say, I truly do believe, in whatever religion you want to say, Catholicism,
exactly, right?
Orthodox, Hinduism, etc. But recognizing its function within the political sphere is absolutely something that I think both can be done and in certain circumstances should be done.
Absolutely.
To that extent, I think Marinette, he's idealist, but I think he went a bit far enough that there's a lot of reasons why he didn't seize any sort of power during the period. It was because of these anti-clerical statements. Not only because of that, a few other things as well, but you got to placate your masses. It's the opiate of the masses. I don't mean to quote, Marx. I think he's retarded on every single level, but it's right. That statement is factually correct.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, Italy was a very deeply Catholic country at this time, and the anti-clericalism definitely alienated vast swaths of people that they needed for their support.
They needed to fascistize a lot more people before they could ever conflict with the church.
Yeah, exactly. It's just real politic, though. I mean, like you do kind of have to compromise and meet the populace where they're at, and make your message appealing to them. If you're coming straight out the gates, like we're gonna destroy everything you value and cherish, they're probably not gonna support you. Like you kind of have to meet them where they're at and try and bring them closer to your perspective.
It's really similar, completely unrelated. It's really similar to this it was an American Maoist thinker who stated the long march through the institutions, which was the utilization of meeting people in the middle and slowly bringing them further into the idea through time and effort and investment that was going to accomplish Maoism in America. But it's a very similar concept you can apply nearly anywhere else, that you need to utilize, not compromise on your ideals, but you need to utilize a sort of half measure to get people to start thinking about it as a possible alternative rather than something to immediately reject.
Yeah, it's as you said, as we've all said, it's a useful tool to ensure that the population can be controlled until a later stage of which either the religious fervor has been replaced by an ideological fervor or by the general acclimatization of the population to the ideas.
Well, yeah, if you just come in swinging, like you were saying earlier, we're going to destroy your entire way of life. No one will sensibly go with you. It's incredibly ignorant. But as you see today, and I don't mean to bring modern politics into this, but a lot of groups are like that.
We're going to take the right to vote away from women.
Well, what's interesting as well is that
exactly that right there is a good example.
The only time that has worked ever, at least in my knowledge, was whenever the current lifestyle was directly detrimental to the masses. Like the current lifestyle that existed before the Russian revolutions, where it was just oppressive and awful to those who lived it, and at least by their experience of the matter, anyone stands on that regardless. But like, there needs to be such a desperate desire for change before you can utilize that kind of rhetoric and expect it to work. It can, but it's very rare and it's very situational.
The first few years of the Russian Revolution are a good example. A great example, in fact, because the Russian Revolution, Lenin and his men, initially they immediately attacked every facet of living as a Russian citizen, as a Russian peasant and whatnot. Your religion was wrong. Your style of life was wrong. Everything was wrong. The Tsar was wrong.
And it was also immediately pointing out this is why it's wrong. It's not like with a lot of modern kind of fringe politics nowadays. That's like this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong, and you just need to accept our dogma, our rhetoric. Yeah, that was the one. I couldn't fucking think of it. It was very much this concept of it's not just that we want a better life. It's not that we want a different life. It's that we can directly point to you, the people, why this life will be better and what ills of your current life it will correct.
Exactly.
Then they took most of it back, Well, yeah, but then they took most of it back. They were initially anti-alcohol. Stalin took over, bring it back, the kulaks, all that stuff, They took a lot of that back after a while because they realized it wasn't working as of the state of civil war that it was.
Well, it's also a matter of that kind of rhetoric is in and of itself a tool. It's meant to promote a very revolutionary, violent alteration in the way of things. It's not inherently meant as something which is not only are we saying this, not only do we believe it, but we're going to act on it. I'm fairly positive that many people believe what they were trying to say, but those who had to, as you stated earlier, weaponize Goebbels, placate their masses, they had to realize that in order to maintain the kind of power necessary for their revolutionary change, there would need to be some alteration to policy that they had promised.
Okay.
No, you're right. You're right. I agree with that.
We've spent some time on 0.5. 0.6 I expect to also be pretty spicy. So probably the most spicy, to be honest. So we'll move on to 0.6, okay?
All right.
So abolition of maritable permission, easy divorce, gradual devaluation of marriage, eventually to be replaced by free love and children reared in state institutions. So definitely anti-family. I do want to emphasize the use of free love. At the time of writing this, when anarchists talked about free love, they weren't talking about polyamory or
no, they were talking about doing cocaine and orgies in the back house like Pianzio was.
Yeah,
love was,
but
they didn't know how bad it was going to get.
When
didn't change very much over time until the 80s when it became past the AIDS needle.
What he's talking about is love, without the oversight of the church or the state. That's what was meant by free love at the time of this writing. More so than polyamory or gay sex or things like that.
Well, I don't know about the gay sex part. He had
that was pretty involved.
I'm kind of sympathetic to that. Two people can decide to spend their lives together without including the church or the state in that.
Absolutely.
And if they choose to split ways later on, it doesn't lead to a messy divorce where one side that is favored in the courts takes off with half of the dude's shit. It's usually the dude who suffers in that.
Yeah, he gets shafted. But I think the idea of an easy divorce is a good one, a good start. But I think that the anti-family rhetoric, it also isn't entirely wrong, right? It has a predication in a basis of understanding of a necessary to replace a state entity. I mean, look at the current day. Look at how many people are fatherless or already live in state institutions. Look at the state of those state institutions. Orphanages and foster homes where children are beat routinely, and these replacements, and even their own blood family, beat them and punish them for the most minuscule of effects, just for their own sick pleasures. So it's understandable that there needs to be a more proficient state agency for the caring of children, especially in a lot of these situations. But the thing about marriage is that I believe that
absolutely, but they didn't know it back then.
Well, absolutely, they knew it back then. Fucking right, they knew.
They didn't know how bad. Now,
it's not a new issue.
Now most people are fatherless. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I know.
Seamus is right in the fact that it's not a new issue. The thing is, nowadays, is we can look at decades of digital documentation on this, we can say, wow, what the fuck? Like, where did this
Yeah,
all
I know,
come
right?
from? The issue's always been there. It just hasn't
has
been explicit public knowledge as it is today.
It was this has always been an issue, right? Orphanages have always been terrible places to live, awful. This is a well-known fact. They've always been bad. Same with the concept of adoption. It's always been a horrible thing for the person being adopted. This isn't new. So the concept of an easy separation and whatnot is good, but it needs to be implemented in a way where the state has the control.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, people who hate each other shouldn't be forced by law to stay with each other. That's how you get, marital murder. Obviously, but like, if as you see today, where the ease, even though it's not nice on the guy, it's still like a remotely easy process, at least compared to the past. You get this prevalence of people breaking up. Is that our culture making people get together too quickly? I don't know. Maybe we're letting people break up too quickly. I don't know. But as you see, most people are from broken families.
I feel that it's more of an issue of consumerism than any individual fault. I think
don't
that
even think it's
idea
like
has brought about this kind of concept of individual greed, individual necessity that has led to people being horrific in this way. I mean, abandoning children and spouses, and
and also if you look at it well, there's now I'm speaking specifically in American context, so I'm unsure if it's different in other liberal Western nations. But in the American context, a big portion of what fuels these kind of fatherless or motherless situations that are just deeply not okay for children. I mean, you can just look at statistical analysis for that. Is like you were saying, Seamus, is this kind of consumerism that places solely the individual above everything else. It's this conception that, well, if I'm not happy, I don't have to deal with this. And on one hand, yes, you shouldn't allow yourself to stay in a miserable situation. But on the other hand, unhappiness of the self should not be excuse or reason for the infliction of unhappiness upon others. There needs to be a consideration of those around you, of how your actions affect those not only in your direct vicinity, but of the entirety of the nation, which inevitably all actions do end up affecting in one way or the other. And that is almost completely absent in the liberal capitalist mindset of Americans today. That very direct. It's almost. I think I saw this on the Futurism Forever channel. It was in the Futurism Forever chat, where it was from Antonin Artaud. I can't pronounce his name. The anarchist says, "Neither God nor master, I alone." It's almost anarchistic in a way, where it's like, I alone, me. That's it. And maybe I might be misconstruing that a little bit, and I do apologize if I am. Just it was the one that popped up into my head at the time. But
it's a good example. The anarchist, a lot of the anarchist thoughts are very individualistic, right? Like a majority of anarchists that you'll see, that you'll read about, are extremely individualized people who don't give a shit whether the rest of their people die or whatnot. Look at egoism, for example, right?
I was
about to mention egoism, more objectivism.
I would hop in. There are like two different strains of anarchism there. There's like individualist anarchism, and there's more communal anarchism. And,
I know, there's an important distinction to be made between them. But for the most part, the vast majority of anarchists will be individualistic anarchists. They won't be the communal types. They will be the types who don't really give a shit about other people and only care about themselves. The egoistic types, right? The reader of Ayn Rand.
Ayn Rand was an ultra-capitalist, though, so like she's not a good example of anarchist
even better.
thought.
Ultra-capitalism is just another form of anarchist thought. It simply is. If you've read Hoppe and whatnot with his conceptions of how the individual.
I have not read Hoppe. I like Renzo Novatore. That's like my egoist guy. I quote him a lot on the channel.
When you go far enough in the direction of capitalism, you end up with anarchism. Just as if you go far enough in any direction of almost any ideology, you'll end up with some form of anarchistic thought. Right.
It all comes back. Branching off is far different.
Left anarchists.
What was that? Chaz. We saw anarchism in practice in Chaz, and it was everything that they didn't promise.
It was a poor
Look at
example of a
Barcelona, where they
temporary
just murdered each other
autonomous
for 3
zone.
years straight. That was Barcelona, the CNT-FAI. They just killed
I
each other
mean-
for years on years.
The guy who came up with the concept of like the temporary autonomous zone, Hakim Bey, like refers to Fiume as like a positive example of temporary autonomous zones. The thing with Chaz is you're dealing with modern American leftists who are kind of retarded and
Oh,
yeah, I
don't
mean,
give them
you-
undue
you-
credit, Gio. They're absolutely retarded.
Yeah, don't
yeah,
pull your
you,
punches.
you
Come
can
on.
you cannot build anything of worth like if you're trying to build on top of a swamp or like with a swamp, like you gotta
Have
go
you
to
ever
greener
watched Monty
pastures.
Python? Swamp Castle? Come on. I built my
But-
castle on a swamp. It fell
But
down.
to finish up what I was saying earlier, though, it very much it delineates into that. And from my conception of things, Dark, can you mute yourself? That's a lot of background noise there, but
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry.
to continue on with where I was going, and I think ultimately that does derive from a lack of, I don't want to say sacredness, but kind of a lack of importance given to the maintaining of familial ties, the maintaining of marriage, the maintaining of, especially if you're now like if you're just a husband and a wife and there's no children involved, it's a slightly different story, but especially in regards to families which have children. And I think that out
I
of
believe Marinetti
everything,
had a point about taking children away from their families at the age of 6 and putting them in state institutions to grow up the rest of their lives.
I think in some ways, there might be a point there, but I'd also argue that equivalently that could be remedied by proper spread of ideas and proper education on being a good family individual, on
You
properly recognizing and
massively
properly.
shift
In like
the
some
zeitgeist.
No,
idealistic
yeah,
sense,
you would. It would be.
in
It would.
some
It would have
idealistic
to be a
sense, it could be like
massive.
Sparta, but we're not gonna be like that in modern day.
But I mean, and you're right, Seamus. It would
Like,
have to be a massive ideological shift, and I don't disagree there. But I think anybody who's promoting anything of the sort, fascism, futurism, anything other than essentially liberal capitalism, is promoting a massive cultural and social shift. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think inherently, if you're going to support something, support it all the way, even if that comes with all the difficulties of converting a nation from one ideology to another. I mean, it's inherently
Absolutely.
difficult. It's inherently a challenge, but you need to be willing to stand for that.
Yep, and from a state's perspective, it's a lot easier to control children who have been in state institutions, right?
Yeah, I mean, like from a futurist nationalist perspective, like you're trying to mold the new Italian is like
You're building
the
a new
family
man.
institution not an affront to doing that.
You have
just
to
like
make a
throwing
decision
that
here.
out there.
You have to look at the hard data, and you have to go: is the family structure capable of producing a man who will die without being without any kind of hesitation? A man who will die for a beautiful idea right then and
I'm
there.
looking at the hard data, and I see everyone who's been through the public, raising system. Albert Fish, he was an orphan. Henry Dogger, all these weirdos, these absolute lunatics. There's a certain amount of affection you can't give when it's a classroom-like environment.
The current orphanage system, like I said, is horrific and always has been. So using it as a modicum of data is kind of inefficient. Of course, and I would agree with that, Seamus. But I think that it's also the case that, I mean, looking at it under the current familial structure, you could say the same thing. It does not function as a good representation of a reformed or an altered familial structure. And I think that you can look at, historically speaking, cultures and nations which maintain the familial structure who still had that incredible loyalty to the national idea. And you can look at ones that didn't, there are, like Sparta. Right. No, and I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm not saying there doesn't exist. I'm not saying there doesn't exist societies that there wasn't that envelopment in a state institution which led to incredible loyalty. I'm simply saying I don't believe that the family institution is antithetical to that. I think it's more difficult to accomplish, almost certainly, absolutely, but I don't think it's antithetical. You should read the
Sparta as an example is the exception, not the rule. Like Sparta is so different from every other human society.
It was the only state. It was the only state to ever implement this in its fullest. I think, honestly, I've got to be real. I think Marinetti may have drawn his inspiration for that concept of taking children from their families and placing them in state institutions at the age of 6 from the Spartan experiment. I mean, look at them. They constructed generation after generation of selfless warriors with next to no corruption. Right, in a state that didn't even need money to function, a state that had a controlled hierarchy and
a conservative state. If you knew about their actual structure, did not change for thousands of years.
It did,
Like
though.
they
It
like
did, absolutely.
you understand, like ancient Sparta was in ancient Greece. It lasted long enough to be defeated by the Romans, but they were a rump state. They were a rump state at the end.
Hold on. No, you if you read the Constitution of the Lacedaemonians, it goes into great detail about how their life actually worked. There was a lot of changes that came to the Spartan state over the course of those 1,000 years of existence. A whole platitude of them, including how their government operated, how their government ran, right? But the main point is that it was so advanced it didn't need to constantly be changing because it was already ahead of everyone else, right? The gender role concept was almost entirely abolished, right? Women ran the farms and fought in the army if need be. It wasn't this kind of separated state, and the children grew up in state institutions and became selfless warriors willing to die at a moment's notice for nothing other than the order given to them. And you had a government that was built upon merit, upon the abilities of those who had fought selflessly for their city state, for their country, right? Who would then be given the power of legislative action, right? Who would then be given that kind of concept, that kind of power, where they could enact the changes that they saw that the Spartan army, the Spartan nation as a general needed it, right? And the legislative body controlled that.
I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that. You are absolutely right. It was a good system. However, it was everything else. It was the helos. They could not expand. You could not, but you could with the system. They could not expand to make themselves more powerful enough to survive Rome. They only survived Macedon because Macedon would not bother with them. They did not survive Rome because Rome wanted the whole Mediterranean. They didn't have the men to fight Rome because they could not expand the system they had.
That's an interesting claim. It's not true. It's an interesting claim, but it's not true. The Spartan state survived until the 1100s, just so you know. As an entity, as a same structure as it did long ago, until it finally sputtered out after the entry of, I think it was Serbians, some kind of Slavic peoples from the Balkans entered into the area and undermined the population there and completely devoided them of any concept of their past. But yeah, there's historical records all the way up to the 1100s recording the continuation of their state. That is one of the longest lasting states you'll ever see. It outlasted Rome. Outlasted every other organization that came around.
Oh no, I'm not arguing that it had lasting power. I'm not arguing that.
I'm just saying as an example of a concept of employing this kind of taking from the family, removing the family institution and favoring it instead with state-grown education and state-grown philosophy. What you get is a highly motivated population willing to die, willing to work endlessly and suffer until the point where they die, without qualms, without pay. And that's sort of what Marinetti is probably wanting towards.
Well, I wouldn't say without pay. The Spartan soldiers were aristocrats in their nation.
No, they weren't paid. They weren't paid. There was no pay because the money didn't exist. Money was in exchange of iron bars, and it was useless because nobody else used that, and there was no currency exchange.
I'm talking about pay in other means. Their service to the nation was paid off by the fact they had a plot of land and slaves to run. It wasn't pay in the way that we have nowadays, but it was compensation.
It wasn't pay by currency, but it was compensation.
No, it was a compensation. It wasn't even. I wouldn't even call it compensation because they had to continue and using all of that goods. None of that went to them. They didn't own the land. If you read the Constitution of the Lacedaemonians, they didn't own the land. The state owned the land. They operated on it. They ran the farm. Right? They were a state supervisor. They weren't the owner of any farm. Yes, they got to live in the nice big fancy house after fucking 35 years of service, but they didn't own it. And when they died, it didn't go to their child. It didn't go to anyone else. It went to the next person in line. That was it. Okay?
I wouldn't say it didn't go to anyone they wanted. You had a constant, group of women who, got the properties of their husbands when they died, who were incredibly wealthy, who had a lot of influence in the Spartan system. It's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that property did exist in that extent.
They didn't own the property though. They managed it. It was very clearly written in the Constitution of the Lacedaemonians that they didn't own the property. Nothing was owned by an individual. It was all state property. Every single square inch. Every single weapon, every single person, be they citizen, be they slave, was state property. And I think that's what Marinetti is getting at when he refers to this kind of concept of a national people willing to die. Beautiful idea worth dying for, right? Of young men willing to go off and fight in wars and they come back to Italy and run these operations of legislature. I think to a degree that he drew some inspiration from that Spartanistic state, from the construction that was already long ago. Maybe not from a historical standpoint, but from its structural standpoint, Sparta was a behemoth. That not in the sense that
I
it was
mean,
a
there's
massive
no argument that
Rome, right?
in every single sense, Sparta punched above its weight. You're right. You're right. Before we go any further, Joe, I'm going to go ahead and apologize. We got really derailed.
It's all good. The conversation is lively. Like, the main fear is
I'm
like
maintaining
awkward
its eye
silences.
to-
Like, this is good. It's good radio. So
No, that was a good
I'm
conversation, man. That could be a whole actual conversation, like 3-hour
Yeah,
video on
I
itself.
think I think
write an
every
article
single one of these points could be like an argument in and of
Hey, consider
itself.
yourself guest on Third Position Radio.
We could have
Yeah.
14 full-length podcasts on each of these, or however many points
Absolutely.
there are
Yeah.
in this manifesto. 11,
Oh yeah,
I think.
absolutely,
I'm
absolutely.
Yeah.
actually, you know what? I'm going to commit to it now. I'm going to write an article: Spartanism and Fascism.
All right. I look forward to reading that actually.
Fuck yeah.
I'm going to use Marinetti as a basis of this drawn out. Even though he hated the past, I understand that.
Yeah.
I'm making an understanding here that he may have taken from a historical example of a structure in order to implement it in a much different and more futuristic way, a progressive way.
Yeah, he wouldn't frame it in like a Spartan revival thing.
No, he would
but,
never.
like,
He would
I
never
mean,
say it's Spartanism or like a revival of Spartan aesthetic. But it definitely has a large overlap with its concepts.
he was an educated person, and he did definitely like he was aware of it. Like it's not like he was just completely ignorant about it. So like it probably did inform his worldview.
And it makes perfect sense from a policy statement. You're a nation that's going to be engaged in war, then you should have a population of warriors.
Yeah.
But this isn't historical foundation. I want to make that clear because I'm not saying that this is like we're going to beat the Spartans off because they have similarities and overlap with concepts. But I think that it's an interesting thought process to compare the ideas of Spartanism with the modern interpretation, the interpretation of fascism, right, where you have a population wholly dedicated to the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, all within the state. Perfectly embodies the concept that Sparta also presented all those years ago. The 2 millennia ago.
Yeah. Are we ready to move on to point 7?
I think so.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, after like 3 days of talking, yeah, I think I'm ready.
All right. All right. Point 7.
Feature-like film going on there.
Maintenance of the army and the navy in full operational order until the Austro-Hungarian Empire has been dismantled, after which the reduction of the number of personnel to a bare minimum while training a large number of officer cadres through a system of rapid instruction. By way of examples, 200,000 men with 60,000 officers, whose training could be divided into 4 3-month courses each year. Then the provision of military and sports education in schools, preparation for a total mobilization of industry, arms and munition, to come into effect in the event of war, and at the same time as military mobilization takes place. In short, everything ready at minimum cost in the event of war or revolution. Our war must aim at total victory, which means the dismembering of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as well as safeguarding our natural boundaries, both land and sea, without which we would not have our hands free for the clearing out, the cleaning up, the renewal, and the expansion of Italy. Abolition of ceremonial patriotism, of the obsession with monuments, and of every kind of traditionalist state interference in artistic matters. First of all, that's the point. First of all, I want to say I agree wholeheartedly with the last point. Every kind of traditionalist state interference in artistic matters. It got brought up earlier with Stalin cracking down on the Soviet futurists. Hitler did the same thing with his degenerate art exhibit and cracking down on modern art because he personally didn't like it. I think the state should stay out of the creative process. I don't think they're qualified to comment on what constitutes good art or bad art. I think it's up to the expression of the individual who creates it. If he finds an audience for his art, then good for him. If not, then he'll remain obscure, and it's not really a threat to anything. But yeah, that's a long point. It's mostly about expanding the military, building the
I don't think
military
anybody
up.
here disagrees with standing armies. So
No.
Yeah,
I already spoke entirely because I would love to dismantle the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
all over again
I-
for a second time. Holy shit, poor boys.
I think what's interesting about this as well is that if I'm remembering correctly, so and I might not be, so correct me if I'm wrong. There was a push from Marinetti, or at least some aspects of the futurist, to make futurism the official art style of the fascist Italian state. I remember
Oh yeah, there
reading
was a
something
lot of
along
pushes
those
for
lines.
that. There was a lot
Yeah,
of pushes
so
for that.
I find it interesting that in this political manifesto, there's a almost not. I'm not sure if I'd call it necessarily a 180 because I might be misinterpreting the futurist intention here, but a complete rejection of state interference in artistic matters, and I'm not sure how that wouldn't be perceived as an interference
not
with
the
it,
only
similar
180.
to Soviet realism.
It's not the only 180. Like if you look at, for example, his opinions on the Catholic Church, right? Right here, he says we need to destroy it. All its land needs to be nationalized, take it away. And later on, he says that needs to be distributed to soldiers and whatnot. But then in the 1930s, he becomes a Catholic himself and promotes Catholicism. And he says that it doesn't actually conflict with futurism's views. So there is degree of change in futurism over the years.
Okay, I just couldn't remember.
Gerardo Dottori, for example, did a lot of religious paintings in a futurist style. I would divide futurism into like two waves. There's like pre-fascism futurism,
avant-garde, and then post-garde.
Yeah, and then the post or during fascism futurism. And the artists were different too. Like a lot of the original artists died in World War One.
Yeah, 82%.
And then you had guys like Tullio Crowley, Gerardo Dottori. They took a lot of stylistic cues from the like original movement, but it was kind of in a fascist context. So like there was more cues to like Catholicism or like fascism proper, portraits of Mussolini, like state-sponsored works, stuff like that. Whereas the original
There's
movement
nothing
was
wrong with developing.
a lot
There's
of
nothing wrong with feeling dynamic and changing.
Like yeah, a lot of the anarchistic elements weren't really present.
Right, and I wasn't saying
during
there's anything
fascism,
wrong with the.
which makes sense. Like the futurist movement evolved with the times. Like you know, so it's
Right, and I
important
wasn't
to
trying
note
to say
that.
there was anything wrong with them changing their stance on that. It happens all the time. It's
Yeah.
organic. But I was just making sure that I wasn't misremembering that. I mean,
No.
on a more personal standpoint, I don't necessarily agree with that last standpoint. Not in the sense that I think that the state should have total control like Soviet realism did, but I think that there is place for the state to promote certain forms of art, to promote things that support kind of the national identity, the national goal, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that should come at the cost of repression of more free form expression of artistic.
Purge the artists I disagree with.
But I don't think there should be like a total repression of artistic.
If it ain't
matters.
dogs playing poker, they're getting shot.
If it is not. Oh gosh, I mean, like, because personally, as much as there was a repression of like the Russian futurists and all that stuff, I find Soviet realism to be an incredibly intriguing artistic style. I greatly enjoy it. But I understand how
living in a 5x5 cement block.
I'm more talking about the propaganda that came of it, but regardless.
Oh, okay. I thought you wanted to live in the
no. Because I've seen the futurist architecture, and I love futurist architecture, but Soviet realist art. In terms of propaganda flyers, murals, and the like, that I greatly enjoy. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but once again, it needs to be that fine line walked between promotion and repression. It shouldn't go too far into repression, and it shouldn't go so far into promotion that it essentially becomes repression. But I do absolutely disagree with the abolition of ceremonial patriotism. I think that's part and parcel of establishing, building, and maintaining a patriotic identity.
I think that's like an important differentiation.
Well, I mean, people need
futurism
ceremony.
and
It's just how it is.
yeah, and fascism, because fascism was all about like ceremonial patriotism and like marches and these grand ceremonies of like Italian pride or Italian strength. Those were definitely present in fascism. That aspect of futurism did not carry over at all. For better or worse. I'm kind of neutral on it, to be honest. I'm not. I think in the absence of like something more legitimate, it is just pageantry.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Which is like what we deal with. Like I'm Canadian, like on Canada Day and shit. Like that kind of empty flag waving patriotism that doesn't really stand for anything that's genuinely nationalistic. It's just empty.
Like, I think it
But
comes especially from, like, especially in fascist Italy, there was that vibrant sense of, we are Italians. I love Italy. I stand for Italy. I die for Italy. It was this kind of all-encompassing, I am part and parcel to
You
this
are
state.
Italy.
It
You
is
are a
me.
part of
I am
Italy.
Italy, and Italy is me. And that gave that ceremony, it gave it meaning, it gave it purpose. It wasn't just a celebration of, some vacuous idea of a nation. It was a celebration almost of the person, but the person in a collective sense. The populace in the nation and the nation therein. That I think there was a definite beauty in that kind of ceremony. Whereas I totally agree.
Gentile states with this kind of stuff, the state and individual are one.
Right, exactly. And it was that spread of that idea.
Term.
And I think that you're absolutely right, Gio, that kind of, that vacuous, completely meaningless kind of patriotism that you see a lot in Western countries nowadays, where it's window dressing to consumerism, essentially. It's, hey, buy your flags, buy your stuff, go wave them at a parade, and that's made to promote different products and then go home.
Yeah.
There's no sense of pride there. There's no sense of love. There's no sense of dedication. There's no sense of loyalty that is expressed through action. It's just action for consumerism.
Of sacrifice, of
True,
willing
true.
to
I mean,
die
like,
for something greater than yourself.
Absolutely, 100%.
Which is very much
like I may be hypocritical because I'm an American. I see 4th of July as like an actual celebration. But the way that and again, this might just be hypocritical because American. I was in France one time during Bastille Day, and it was that shallow what you're talking about. I just went to the beach, watched the boat shoot up the fireworks, and that was it.
But it
That
wasn't
nothing more.
Founded though. The Bastille Day used to be fucking amazing. Like it was a celebration of pure revolution. They had stormed the Bastille. They had ended the oppression. They had brought France into a new era, right? No longer beholden to the aristocratic and all-seeing, all-powerful Bourbon monarchy, right? No longer was the Ancien regime in power. Now you had the common man, the Jacobin, right? That's why the Bastille Day was important. Now it's been turned into this consumerist commodity, along with a lot of other national holidays that used to mean something, even in the early romantic nationalism of the initial liberal movements that founded these nations, right? Like it wasn't always an empty, meaningless experience, For a time, these things actually did mean something.
What do people really do on like Canada Day or the 4th of July though? Like, they wave their flag, they get drunk, they watch some fireworks. Like I do think it is kind of hollow and empty.
Nowadays it's become a consumerist holiday, right? Nowadays it's just like whatever, who cares? You're just out here to be a part of something, not really understanding what it means. But when these nations were initially founded, the initial liberals who did found it were built upon romantic nationalism. Right? They had concepts, they had ideas that weren't like they are now. They were revolutionary, right? And a lot of them inspired what fashion would become, like Robespierre and his concept of nation, right? These people, even though they were liberals, they were bourgeoisie, right? They had a lot in common with our very, at least at the time, with the early movements that would come after, right? What would replace them. They just slowly became corrupted and stagnant.
Yeah. Should we move on to point 8, or does anyone have
Sure. I
anything
mean, I don't
they
know
want
much else to say.
All right. Point 8. preparation for the future nationalization of land with the creation of a vast government-owned domain consisting of the property of religious organizations and local authorities, as well as the expropriation of all uncultivated or badly managed lands. High taxation of all inherited property, with limits set on the number of successive heirs. A taxation system based on direct progressive taxes with complete verification. Freedom of strike action, of assembly, of association, and of the press. Reform and purging of the police. Abolition of the secret police. Interdiction of army intervention for the purpose of restoring public order. Cost-free recourse to the law and an elected judiciary. Minimum set wages automatically raised in relation to the cost of living. A legal maximum of 8 consecutive hours of work. Parity of remuneration for men and women for equal work. Fair and impartial laws governing individual and collective labor agreements. Transformation of charity work into social welfare and national insurance. Workers' pensions. Sequestration of 2/3 of all assets gained through war contracts. That's point 8. Again, very progressive for its time. You have like calling for the 8-hour workday, minimum wages.
A lot of things that would then appear in
men and
fascism.
women. Yeah. Which like did carry over to fascism proper. I think a lot of modern fascists have like a very skewed understanding of what fascism is.
You mean absolutely no understanding?
Yeah, no understanding of doctrine, no reading, no nothing.
Believe it or not, I am trying to be
like
respectful
black people,
here.
thus I must be.
No, I mean, like, it's not a matter. That's not a matter of like. I understand that, Gio, but like, it's just true. Like most people who call themselves fascist have no fucking idea what they're talking about, and most people who call something fascist have no idea what they're talking about. Hell, the only reason I do is I spent.
I was about to say that's typically why it is.
Yeah, I mean, like
people are told what fascism is. Fascism is being racist and being authoritarian. That's all people know, and like, I'll become that. They don't understand what they signed up to.
I've been collecting and researching books on fascism and fascist-adjacent movements for 6 years now. I have, except for very, very small text produced by like historical archives, I've very rarely found a book on fascism that's actually like that's good material.
So
in terms of like an actual book form,
I actually found a whole fuck ton. You got to look at the things that happened in the time, firsthand accounts. You know, Paul Enzig.
Right, exactly, and that is difficult. That is difficult to find.
This is why I have a PDF library.
Right, yeah, and I do respect that. I personally can't do PDFs. Like I just can't. Okay. It's not something I've ever.
We're actually
really
planning on printing them. We're actually planning on publishing and printing these books that have been, like this for almost 100 years. Now.
And it's so for me, it's been a very expensive process to learn about fascism proper. Like very,
you got to buy all these out of print books.
And you got to make sure you get them that like they're not completely ripped up or completely inked out or all this stuff. Like I got a copy of Genesis and Structure of Society that is almost unlegible due to the amount of notation that's within the book itself.
Yeah, it's probably passed through many hands before you got it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that just it builds into that complete misunderstanding of fascism, because not only do you have the liberal capitalist propaganda, not only do you have 80 years of repression, not only do you have an incredibly aged library, which is only really maintained in modern circles through collectors like myself or through digital libraries like the Seamus have. Not only do you combine all of that,
some physical collection, but like it's probably not as extensive as yours.
Yeah,
it's expensive. Like for example, we're getting our hands on a $5,000 or $6,000 copy of something called. It's called the Cross and no, what was it? It's the Cross and the Sickle, and it's a discussion on fascism and its connections to the Communist Party in Italy.
I mean, it's just like it's exactly like that. It is very much like I look at like I was looking at some books, like okay, a modern scholar who did a lot of research into fascism. I don't know enough about him to really know what the content of his books were, but I am interested in getting some. It was A. James Gregor, who is an American.
Oh, yeah. I have a whole bunch of his books.
Yeah, I was looking online for some of his books to obtain. Not a single one of them is under $90. Not a single one.
Yeah, I know they're expensive.
It's ludicrous, and it's this total and I almost guarantee it's a very similar thing. At least in my experience with like futurism, like the book that we're reading out of this the PDF, the 643 pages one. I went to go buy that on Amazon, $200.
Yeah.
There's this.
At the
there's
same
this
time, you could buy shit like the Communist Manifesto
for $5 at fucking
$5.
Goodwill.
Yeah.
Like it's this odd interpretation, and I don't mean to go off on a rant about liberal capitalism, but this is this
Go
odd
right
interpretation
ahead. Like,
that
you know,
there's this odd interpretation that because we're democratic, we're free in our capacity to research and understand, and that's just not the case. Unless you're incredibly dedicated to the study of something, especially something fringe like myself and Seamus here, you just don't have the access to the resources. You don't.
It
So
costs an arm and a leg to obtain it.
exactly.
Or you have
And-
to travel. You have to travel to the Vatican Library in order to go and access these books that are 100 years old, and
it's this entirely, it's this infuriating hypocrisy that comes from proponents of liberal capitalism, that there's this concept that we're free and we have the capacity to research and we know all this stuff. No, you fucking don't. No, you fucking don't. There is only the capacity to truly read and understand 2 to 3 ideologies, maybe 4 in their totality, including their subsections.
This is an intentional act too. It's not like this is because people don't want to print it.
No, exactly. It's intentional. 100%.
They're shutting down the ability to research this ideology to prevent people from being curious about it. It is textbook censorship. I mean,
but instead of censorship by direct denial, it's censorship by price.
Exactly. So that bourgeoisie and the academics can skew fascism however they wish to. You can't get
on a personal level, like reading texts like this one is really what like opened my mind up to fascism. Like I realized it had always been misrepresented to me. So like I opened my mind up, and then I found like the internet movement, and like let's be honest here, like there's 10 people watching now, which is good for futurism forever. Like I don't mean to kick dirt, but like platforms like TRS have way bigger viewership.
Weaponized Rebels trying to get in.
And okay, and they completely misrepresent what we're about. They're like, you know, it's just disheartening. It's kind of why like I've publicly been like down on this shit recently. Just I don't really see the point in attaching myself to the modern fascist movement anymore. It's like the kind of fascism I wanted to get involved in just doesn't exist anymore.
Well, that's hurtful, Gio. That's hurtful. Come on.
I mean, like, but he's not entirely wrong.
I know.
We're all very small players. Like we're small fish in a big pond.
Yeah, most of these fucking like dudes who call themselves fascists are just like fucking retards who just want like racist conservatism or just
absolutely. It's a complete misconception of fascism. Quite literally, at this point, the only organizations that I consider truly fascist are the ARF and the Seamus Fascisti. Like that's
I would agree with that.
I mean, like, and I don't say that to the detriment of any of these other groups, because I'm sure that there's some very intelligent people in them, but they don't have they either don't have access nor the money to access some of these resources. It's just
or they just
not
don't care,
or they just don't care, which is where the actual retards come in. Yeah, absolutely.
And then
who are perfectly fine with actually misinterpreting an ideology just because they like it that way. They like
it. Yeah, like the Patreon Front people, Doug. Like I read their manifesto. It's literally just like white like nationalism. Like there's no like actual like political, economic, or like philosophical ideology to it.
There's no solutions to the issues of the modern day. It's just white people need more rights.
No, exactly. Or white people need to be defended. If not, white people need more rights.
There's a lot of organizations. It's just literally like, and this is someone who's been part of white nationalist groups. I'll tell you, like the worst part.
When did that pipeline start existing? When did you go from a NatSoc or a Wignat into a fascist,
but white,
not from a socialist? Right? When did this pipeline start? Where you go from fucking a Wignat or a NatSoc?
So, in my experience, because we have a couple members in the ARF who are like that, they were NatSoc, they disavowed it, they became fascist. Where it mostly comes from is that in America today, like there are absolutely white nationalists, but most of them are simply people who are like, you know, hey, I don't like that people I know or myself am being derided, so I'm going to support these people, but they don't actually believe in the in the racialist aspects of it. They just want to stop being pushed around like that. So they can't really identify with National Socialism or with white nationalism, so it inevitably pushes them away, and when they look further, they tend to find something that leads them into fascism. I know plenty of people who found your website, Seamus, and I know some people who found mine, and it's led them towards proper fascism.
I mean, like, from a personal standpoint, like, I went looking for fascism online, and like the first people I found was like Daily Stormer, then Iron March, and like, you know, I went through like
Squire's Trial. Read Squire's Trial.
Yeah, I was trying to be open minded.
Dude, I read Squire's Trial, and that shit's just like, it's fucking like deep in like homosexuality, dog. Like, there's so much sexual tension between like the characters. Like, it's fucking disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, like, I was trying to be open-minded and find where the common ground was. I eventually decided, like, there isn't very much common ground.
There's none. Don't give them the edge, Gio. There's none.
No, there's none. Yeah, absolutely. It is something that must be maintained. There is no common ground.
Yeah, I realized this after a couple years, and it's been, like, a few years now since I've, like, mingled with those crowds. But, like, that's what you find if you go looking for fascism. Way before you're going to find Futurism Forever.
Yeah, that's what I was like trying to say on Twitter. Like you need to like create a new ideology with like some like philosophy with like some of the tenets of fascism. Like you can't go out in like the streets. I don't want to abandon it. Yeah. Like I don't want to abandon it either. But like if you like fucking like talk to these people that like are brainwashed into like what the liberal like government says. Like they're all gonna like just accept what fucking like most people in the society says, and this fascism is like racist, like
I mean, and that's why the ARF has. I mean, and it's also partially because like as the main reader, philosopher, writer for the ARF, and articles are coming, I promise. Like I've kind of developed Reformationism as I call it to Seamus. It's a branch. It's ultimately fascist, but it's simply an American expression of it. Yeah, it's a different name, but there's still that base doctrine, that base idea.
I don't disagree with that happening. I mean, we've had this discussion in the Seamus Lane chat 17.
Yeah, we've had this multiple times actually.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the idea of using a name, right? But as long as you're not hiding it, right? You're open about it. I mean, your platform openly describes yourself as fascist. Hell, you have the fascists on your flag, right? You don't hide it. There's nothing changed about you, right? As an ideological person,
right? Exactly.
I'm not a fascist. No, I'm a reformationist, right? You're not doing that, so it's fine, right? So there's no difference. But what I actually fucking despise was, oh, I'm not this. I'm actually just another word for it. Okay.
Well, I mean, changing the terms is kind of necessary for things like that because you need to get over the public perception.
I believe that you will fight public.
I mean, I'm talking from a PR perspective. That's what I do as like propaganda.
From a PR perspective, and this is something that I've figured out in the time I've been in this kind of more fringe sphere of things, is that if you want things to change, you cannot change them by playing to the tune of those who hate you. You simply cannot. Now you don't give in.
I'm not playing to the tune. It's that you lightened it. You get a man with
no. I'm not saying
a lower level of it. I want national. I want strong armies, but like
But what I am saying is that for an ideology to become unfringe, right, to go from the fringe to a more generally acceptable idea, there needs to be the understanding of those who support it that they have to be open and serious about their beliefs, and not cower whenever there is threat or otherwise detriment to their personal selves in relation to believing it. I mean, and I don't agree with this group, but I mean, you can look at a really good example of this in the LGBT movement in America. They did not let hatred, vitriol, violence, even killing get in the way of their desire to be normally accepted.
Years that they've been doing this, right?
Right, and it takes fucking time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and there needs to be this acceptance from every circle, but especially from fascist circles, that if you claim to live a life which is founded upon a philosophy of struggle, you need to be willing to fucking struggle.
Absolutely. I hear away this every single time I talk about
Don't sit there and say, oh, I don't want to be doxxed, oh, I don't want to be revealed, oh, I don't want to be public. Then you're not a fucking fascist. You're not.
You're a coward. You're a coward.
You cannot claim to support an ideology that you do not live by. You can't. I understand the fear. I
don't disagree with a single thing you just said. You're right. Absolutely. But we are undermining years upon years of indoctrination. You can't just hit it with a hammer. You got to get in there more deceptively.
You got to keep hitting it with a hammer. You hit it with a hammer over and over and over every single fucking day until it's done.
Yeah, I get that, but that works when you're on equal standing. We're not on equal standing. We are so on the back foot. You need to be deceptive with it.
But look at it. Look at it, Goebbels. Every single movement, every single revolutionary or socially or politically or culturally revolutionary movement to ever exist and succeed always found its power through, to quote Seamus, smashing things with a hammer. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that kind of terminology, but it's a willingness to accept the fact that you will not be accepted until you are.
There's a good quote for this.
I'm not saying... I agree. I agree. Again, it's just, as things stand, we can't do that at this moment.
Those who march with us will certainly face abuse, misunderstanding, and bitter animosity. The possibility of a ferocity of a struggle and of danger. In return, we can only offer them the deep belief that they are fighting that a great land may live.
Absolutely 100%. And I don't mean to take away from the Futurist Manifesto. This kind of became a fascist discussion. But
it's an important discussion.
But, I mean, and the same thing does go for futurism as well. Yes, our ideologies, our ideas, they are fringe. 100% without doubt. We are beaten down, basically censored, and have almost no actual political sway. And most of us don't even have political acumen as an actual skill in regards to the modern political system. But that isn't what's necessary right now. What's necessary right now is a willingness and active defiance, a willingness to be actively defiant towards the capacity of those who are above us in terms of power to push us down. Because that is how you gain respect. And that is what is necessary. Not respect of the people in power. I don't give a fuck about them. And no actual fascist should. You care about the respect of the people who actually support you. The actual people, the workers. And that only comes from being willing to be open, to suffer, to struggle, and to die for what you believe in. 100%. And there will always be times when it seems fucking hopeless. Because that is the very nature of the struggle we subject ourselves to when we dedicate ourselves to the fascists. That is 100% what we understand and will live by and die by if we have to. That does not happen by trying to play nice or be by the rules or anything else. It is by nearly violent, absolute, total struggle for what you believe in and what you stand for. And there can be no other option, no other choice. Ever.
Salute. Thanks for that impassioned speech.
It's absolutely
That was very nice, actually. I did like that a lot.
That's absolutely true.
Okay, but hear me out on this. Just one point, and I'll get off this at the second I get to say this. We might not see that day. We are probably realistically, we're probably the foundation of the fascist renaissance, the second fascist renaissance. But we're probably not going to see that. And more so laying ideological roots might be what actually saves the movement. Because let's be honest, if we try I'm not saying against actual struggle. Yeah, we should go beat the shit out of Antifa whenever we get the chance, or any other fag out there. I agree with that. But we're not going to take over the government tomorrow. We're not going to have a revolution tomorrow. We need to set the foundation.
No, absolutely. 100%.
Absolutely. But
we need to be building bridges within real life communities, like Evan is doing with American Reformation Front, like Seamus is doing. It's not all about arguing about history from 100 years ago.
Yeah.
What is important is that we realize that we are just one generation of torchbearers in the long history, right? We're not the first. We won't be the last. We may never see it. And I've said this before to many of my lectures, and I've said it publicly before. We may never see it happen, right? There's a good chance we won't. We'll never even see it close to happening. But we'll hand down the tools to the next generation to continue our work, to continue the progress that we made onwards and onwards and onwards until one day, wherever it happens, we finally do see it, right? It finally does happen.
Yeah, I hope someone clipped Evan's speech too. I think that's like a highlight of this stream.
Yeah, I'll do that, Gio. Once this like fucking podcast is published, I'll just do that, Gio.
I mean, and it's exactly
Right.
like Seamus said. We are. I mean, and now personally, like, and I understand it's a long stretch. I'm under no illusion here, but I do believe if properly applied, if properly maintained, that spirit, that fervor, it is possible. I'm not saying likely, but possible, a non-zero chance to see the success of fascism somewhere across the world within our generation.
Absolutely, and I agree. And I hope for it every single day.
Exactly, but I will continue to work, and I will
We
continue to
all
work.
want it. I'm just being realistic, you know?
No, right. No, and I get that. I do, 100%. I will continue to work as though it can be achieved in my lifetime, because there is a difference between working towards the next generation and working towards it now. A sense of urgency, a sense of desire, a sense of fervor that is hard to obtain when you realize this happens long after my death. And
You got to
if
keep
I
working
die
away at
in
it every single day until it happens.
Exactly. And if I die in pursuit of this honorable goal, then I die proud of the fact that at the very least I laid the groundwork for those who succeed me to succeed. Even if it's a dozen generations from now.
You've put in the work so that another generation won't have to put in quite as much. Right? They'll be able to use our basis to build their movements easier, quicker, and more proficiently. Even if we don't see it, right? Like you said, it's not a great chance, but there is a chance. Even if we don't see it, the point is that we have done our duty, right? We have put in the effort, we've put in the work, we've done what we possibly physically can to push forwards, to bear the torch, right, down to the very end. And there's a very interesting quote. Gerald Cuminian of the Asterna Nasti, an Irish fascist group, when he was on his deathbed in the 1980s, an RTE journalist came and talked with him, and he said, "How does it feel now that everyone's died? Your whole movement's dead, right? Everybody's washed up." And he chuckled. And he looked at the reporter and he said, "You think we're washed up? You think we're done? We're not. We'll be back in the next generation, and the generation after that, and the generation after that, until we are successful."
Yeah, you killed the men, not the idea.
Absolutely.
I'm going to continue with point 9 because we still have 3 points to go. That was great, though. And, don't worry. Like, the text is just like a starting point to base our conversation around. I don't think there are any, like, strong disagreements on point 8. So we agree with pretty much everything in there. So, it's all good. Anyway, point 9, establishment of a stock of agricultural land for ex-combatants. We need to acquire a certain amount of landed property in Italy at prices to be fixed according to special criteria for distribution, naturally with due caution and reservation. The ex-combatants, or in cases where they are no longer living, their surviving family. Payment for land acquired in this way must be made by the nation as a whole, without distinctions for class, but with progressive distinctions applied with regard to financial circumstances. The funds to come from both voluntary donations and taxes. Payment for these required lands could be foreclosed within 50 years of the dispossession taking place, so that the nation's contribution, whether in the form of donations or taxes, will be minimal. Lands expropriated through taxation will revert, if there are any, to the land stock for ex-combatants. All manual laborers who have served in the armed forces in the war zones must be registered at state expense in the Workers' National Insurance Fund for disability and old age, to take effect from the first day of their actual service. The state will have to pay their annual contributions for the whole duration of the war. Registration of military combatants in the National Fund will be compulsory and will be the responsibility of the state for the whole period of the military service. But it will afterward become the ongoing responsibility of the individuals concerned for the rest of their lives. In the case of allowances granted to holders of medals awarded for valor, the amount will be threefold. The age limit fixed in the regulations will be extended for veterans of the war zone for a period equivalent to that of the duration of the war. For veterans of the war zone who obtain work in the public sector, their military service and campaigns will be taken into account as far as their age and pension are concerned with the state. Whenever necessary, being responsible for payments into the pension fund for the period of their military service. For the 10 years following the war, public administration must alternate open competition with competitions reserved exclusively for veterans of the war zone and disabled war veterans who are physically capable of carrying out the services required. Thoughts on point 9?
Calling back to Rome with the whole distribution of land to veterans, but I like it all together.
Yeah, to Haas, there's your land reforms. It was never implemented. This is an early text.
Haas doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. Like he just fucking says shit and we're like win debates. Like
I remember when he said that
Chris.
fascism in America is going to come out of the Democratic Socialist Party.
He also said it's going to come out of the fucking the ultra left. Like I made an entire video of like Haas's conception. Like he made an analysis of like fucking Bortega and like left, and said like they seem some ideas as like fascism.
I don't know who Kaz is, so I mean no disrespect by that, but that just sounds like Kaz's conspiracy theories.
Has.
Yeah, Haas. Yeah, he's like okay. Haas like he is well read, but he's like such a fucking liar, disingenuous person who would like fucking win debates and like pushes like entirely like, Duginist, like Marxist-Leninist ideology. He's just a fucking liar.
Ah, gotcha.
He's debated like Cultured Thug. He debated Scythe, who we've had on.
Zolt.
Yeah, he debated Zolt. He's a disingenuous piece of shit. Some of his early content showed promise, but he just has not lived up to that. He's basically like a cringe Twitch streamer.
Yeah, like he said he wants to make a media company and he wants like his like ideas to infiltrate the Communist Party USA in order to actually like have him be an actual leader. Like he's just an opportunist, dude. He doesn't care about actual debate.
I do like how, so talking about point 9.
I have no context for this individual besides what you all just told me, but that sounds pretty cringe.
Yeah, neither do I. I do like how in point 9 it very explicitly states that the payment for the required lands, those that would be acquired to then give to war veterans and the like, that the payment could be done within 50 years, and the payment would come from all within society, not just the government, but from everyone, such that it doesn't. I mean, like I know it doesn't explicitly state this, but so that it doesn't like flat out bankrupt the country to perform this kind of land reform. Because I've seen
another interesting point about the land reforms, and it's not entirely Roman. I mean, America for a very long period of time also handed out money or land rather than money to soldiers after service. Like they were entitled to a certain amount of acreage of land. After
you can't say that's an original American concept. We kind of took it from Rome.
American. I'm not
no, he didn't say it was. He didn't say it was originally American.
That it was
just
that
it
also
okay. You know, you're right.
It was also used by
I think there's a good example of it being implemented in a more modern sense. You're right.
Yeah,
it was continued up until World War I.
But I think what's crazy about it is that for in some conception of the sense, for something that seems to care less about how it develops, more that their ideas do develop, it's a very like financially forward thinking conception of how to pay for the land and how to space out those payments so it doesn't become a detriment to the nation as a whole. I don't know, I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I would agree. Any further thoughts on point 9? They definitely value their veterans, and
oh yeah, I mean it's a very it's honestly perhaps the point that if I was back during that time, and I was looking at this with fresh eyes, it was freshly minted, that point right there would be enough to make me partially consider some things.
Yeah, and to the haters who think like, futurism is indistinguishable from progressive liberalism, in case you're like not paying attention, like it's not progressive liberalism at all. It is progressive, but it's also ultra nationalist. And they support.
Also, they had somewhat different conceptions of progress too.
Yeah, for sure.
Once liberalism is for like the end goal of change of getting to egalitarianism, while futurism does not believe in that at all. It just believes in the expansion of technology.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, the term progress has been kind of, co-opted by the left as of late. It didn't always mean this.
Well, it did come out of the Enlightenment, though, out of liberal philosophers.
I mean, you can go back farther than that, but yeah, you can claim that progress came out of a liberal thinkers in the Enlightenment, but that doesn't mean that all progress is inherently from the liberal Enlightenment. It just means that.
Well,
absolutely.
which progressive thinkers originated before the Enlightenment and cannot be categorized as liberal? I'm kind of curious about this.
Thomas Hobbes and Behemoth. Have you ever read Behemoth?
Wait, isn't Thomas Hobbes a Enlightenment thinker though? I'm pretty
he
sure
wasn't a Enlightenment thinker, but he wasn't liberal. He was opposed to liberalism. I think actually he was a little bit before.
The Enlightenment wasn't a purely liberal movement. It had a lot of liberals in it, but it wasn't purely liberal.
Yeah, but I think he was English Civil War. Yeah, that's Enlightenment. But the Thomas Hobbes and Behemoth, not Leviathan, explains the necessity.
Hobbes was the Civil War, English Civil War. He was he was total monarchist, like absolute monarchist.
No, he wasn't. No, that's a very shallow reading of Hobbes. He wrote.
It's been a while since I've read it, so if I'm wrong,
yeah, it's okay. The Hobbes wrote Leviathan, which he promoted the use of an absolute leader, not a monarch, but an absolute leader. Right? He never explicitly said a monarch. He referred to the Leviathan as a figure of absolute power who was the basis of sovereignty. But in Behemoth, he explains how a hereditary monarchy, is completely fucking whack and useless. So, that was against the grain of anti-liberal thinkers of the Enlightenment. But he was still opposed to the liberal conceptions of Commonwealth and whatnot, of republicanism, of any real change towards towards what you would consider at that time to be liberal progressivism. With the shifting of authority, with the change of how sovereignty works and everything. He was opposed to that because he had his own idea on how it worked. Right? It wasn't because he was a supporter of the conservative elements of absolute monarchism and whatnot, but because he had his own interpretation of how a more progressive way to change could happen.
I'm going to be right back. Talk amongst yourselves. I just need to run to the washroom quick.
But, there's other things that we can look at, too. I could go and look for other older thinkers. It would take me time, and I'd have to research it again because I haven't looked into the Enlightenment in, I don't know, a year. Because I don't usually get into discussions about it. But, yeah, there was a whole bunch of different thinkers. It wasn't a purely liberal-based thing. It would be like characterizing the anti-aristocratic revolutions of the 1800s as purely liberal. I will admit a large portion of them were liberal, romantic nationalists, but that isn't exclusive.
That's fair. Yeah, that is true. Some of them were
proto-communism. You had proto-communism in Ireland. It had nothing to do with Marx, nothing at all. But it had things like proletarianism embodied in its spirit. The Fenian Rising in the 1860s, and before that, the Famine Rising in 1848. They described their platform as being against the bourgeoisie and aristocratic powers of England, and against the tyrannical control of markets, and for the people and proletariat, not really using proletariat, but the people, farmers, both agrarian and industrial workers of the Irish nation, right?
Well, so there's a lot of pre-Marxian Christian organizations that form, way before Marx.
These aren't Christian either. They're staunchly anti-clerical. They were denounced.
Oh no, I was referring to some of the German city-states that went in that direction temporarily.
Yeah, but
Robert Owens was.
Go ahead.
Robert Owens and William Morris and what's his name? Edward Bernays, not Bernays. What's his name? Bellamy were all like Christian socialists.
Yeah, but this isn't Christian socialism either, right? This is like its own weird.
Yeah, I know, but
nationalism with social aspects,
Yeah. No, I'm just saying Double G brought up Christian socialism, some Christian elements to it, so I just pointed that out.
Yeah, I completely understand.
Yeah.
Proclamation of the Irish Republic, 1867, and Sinofian. It reads, "We have suffered centuries of outraged enforced poverty and bitter misery. Our rights and liberties have been trampled on by alien aristocracy and bourgeoisie, who, treating us as foes, usurped our lands and drew us away from our unfortunate country, all material riches. The real owners of the soil were removed to make room for cattle and driven across the ocean to seek a means of living, and political rights denied to them at home. While our men of thought and action were condemned to a loss of life and liberty. We're condemned to a loss of life and liberty, but we never lost the memory and hope of a national existence. We remonstrate We are met with the sneers and contempt. Our appeals to arms are always unsuccessful. Today, having no honorable alternative left, we appeal again to force as our last resort. We accept the conditions of appeal, manfully deeming it better to die and struggle for freedom than continue existence under utter serfdom. All men are born with equal rights in association to protect one another and share public burdens. Justice demands that such association should rest upon the basis which maintains equality instead of destroying it. We therefore declare that unable longer to endure the cause of monarchical government or bourgeoisie markets, we aim at the founding of a republic based on universal suffrage, which shall secure the intrinsic value of their labor. The soil of Ireland, at the present possession of the oligarchy, belongs to us, the Irish people, and thus must be restored. We declare and also in the favor of absolute liberty of the conscience and the complete separation of church and state and the absolute nationalization of ecclesiastical land. We appeal to the highest tribunal of evidence for the justness of our cause. History bears testimony to the integrity of our sufferings, and we declare in the face of our brethren that we intend no war against the people and the workers of England. Our war is against the aristocratic lotus, the bourgeoisie sneers, whether bourgeoisie, something or other I cannot pronounce in Gaelic, whether English or Irish, who have eaten and the venture of our field against the aristocratic leeches and bourgeoisie who alike drain our fields and theirs. Herewith we proclaim the Irish Republic. You see, that is liberal.
What year was that? I'm just curious.
That's 1867.
Really?
Yeah.
I've not heard that one before.
That is the proclamation of the Irish Republic.
I went to go get some food. What did I miss?
You missed me read the entire proclamation of the Irish Republic, 1867.
Send it to me, please.
Sure thing.
Since we're on, go on, Joe.
Sorry, back to the text at hand. We've been going long already, and we still got 2 more points. Every point
I
has
think this is like the best part. You go ahead, Gio. Sorry.
God, I'm already worried how Spike.
Many dog. Yeah, we still got 2 more points. So yeah, I think it's been a good discussion and all, and like every point has inspired good conversation. So like I'm happy with how this is turning out and all. But yeah, we're going long, and we still have 2 more points to get through and the conclusion. So I'm gonna continue with point 10. Industrialization and modernization of the moribund cities that are still living in the past. Diminution of the importance of dangerous, unpredictable, foreign-owned industries. Development of the merchant marine and of river traffic. Creation of canalized waterways and the draining of malaria-ridden lands. Realization of the value of all the country's forces and riches. Put a stop to emigration. Emigration, not immigration, emigration. Nationalization and utilization of all water and all mines. Concession of their potential benefits to local public authorities. Easier finance for industry and cooperatives for agriculture. Consumers' rights. That's point 10. Definitely they want to modernize Italy. Build newer modern cities that are more efficient.
Well, of course, they're futurists.
I do enjoy their very specific focus on river traffic. And I can't tell if that's solely meant for the traffic of goods or just like people on boats.
Probably a bit of both.
Probably.
Marinetti did like speed and like, with living dangerously and moving fast. The entire futurist movement was inspired by he got in a car crash and had a realization that like this is
isn't it like the cult of dynamic movement and speed of force and veracity or something like that?
Yeah, more or less.
That section is probably the most there's almost nothing I can say. I liked it all. Like, what can I tell you?
Yeah, I wouldn't have anything to counter signal in this point. I mean,
it's pretty much.
No, I hate river traffic.
I hate boats.
It's also
Italy should be
fuck rivers. Me and my homies hate rivers.
Nation and like a global.
I'm more of a small lake kind of guy. I can't stand rivers.
I'm an ocean guy. I like wide open.
Fuck you! Fuck the ocean.
I'm a creek guy.
I'm sorry, but if I can't have underground maglev trains, I don't want to live.
It's also very interesting on how the situation has entirely changed on the immigration issue. How they were losing people back then, but now there's too many people coming in. Like, I find that pretty interesting. How the situation has changed in over 100 years.
I mean, I think it's also part and parcel to, because if you notice, I'm trying to find it real quick so I don't just speak out my ass here.
But that's the most fun.
Realization of the value of all the country's forces and riches. A part of that is the intelligence, manpower, and the industriousness of the population itself. Immigration would be the essentially, like, and I don't like to think of people as human capital, but it would be a loss of human resource. It would be a detriment to the nation to lose them. So it makes sense that you would, especially in a country that was recently organized, had just been through one of the largest conflict in history up to that point. It makes sense that they want to maintain the population they had, to maintain, that sense of Italian nationalism and identity, and to further progress the Italian nation and people.
They're trying to build up the.
Well, you see that in a lot of developing countries. You get brain drain. You get brain drain when people move away.
Yeah.
This isn't brain drain. It's mostly like rural people who are like immigrating to America. Me and Evan are both like diaspora Italians, I guess.
Yeah.
Some of them moved to Argentina too.
Yeah.
Well, it's not always brain drain per se, but there was plenty of intelligent Italians that came to America, and we used, like Thermi, for example. I know that was like after the fascist period, but like,
One in a million.
These are young, healthy, viable workers who are looking for greener pastures elsewhere because Italy, like, the opportunities just aren't really there.
And
even some of the Italian,
very much about the creation of Italy into those greener pastures as well.
Even like one of the major Italian fascist leaders immigrated at one point before coming back. Edmondo Rossini, he was a part of the IWW for a time and friends with Bill Haywood. Then he came back because he said the Americans were too anti-Italian, and he wanted to bring his people back.
My great-grandfather moved to New York for a couple years and decided America was a shithole and moved back to Italy. So yeah, like Italians weren't welcomed with open arms initially.
Yeah, one of the major mass lynchings.
He was pretty smart. Why did you come back?
Well, my grandfather moved to Canada post World War II, and most like Italians in Canada are post World War II immigrants. So it's like way after this manifesto was written. But I'm not gonna like divulge all my personal family history.
No, but Gia, we need your social insurance number, and
we're gonna need an entire genetic record. We're gonna need your social security. We're gonna need everything.
Your address, your phone number. What's your mother's maiden name?
There was a big immigration trend after World War II as well, and like Canada did not accept immigrants from Italy prior to World War II. They wanted to like establish a strictly like Anglo country and maintain that kind of identity. In America, like immigration from Italy opened up a lot earlier, and that's what they're talking about more. A lot of them did also go to places like Argentina. There's a lot of Italians.
Anglos are fucking.
My family was a post-World War I pre-fascist immigration.
Yeah, Anglos are fucking so uptight and fucking like hypocritical, dog. Like they're fucking pieces of shit.
Yeah, and like white identity is a fucking lie.
Like fucking Benjamin Franklin and so many like the Anglo-Saxons within like the United States government like during the 1700s were like so against other Europeans immigrating to the United States. They're like fucking Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah, man, they got that WASP ideology, man.
Yeah,
man, y'all came to America pretty recently. Like, my family came here right in time for the Civil War. And then, like, my great-great-great-grandfather, he was a double agent. We don't know which side he was a double agent for, but we know he was a double agent.
We know he was a spy. That's about it.
Yeah, this is why I like the Italians, because like they're not like as uptight and fucking like puritanical as the fucking Anglo-Saxons. Like they don't want like mass immigration, but like they're not gonna like fucking discriminate against like you or like a quarter like non like Anglo-Saxon or some shit. It's fucking bullshit.
In my opinion, like a strong anti-immigrant stance from Italians in America or in Canada is just hypocrisy. Like, we're an immigrant group ourselves. We're not founding stock. So it's like we shouldn't relate to the nativist, like, white nationalist thing too much. Like, it's not part of our history. It's not part of our experience in
originally
Canada or in the US. Yeah, I'm like, we were basically the Mexicans of the day. Like, we did construction work and like
we're not even
labor.
white.
Like, and yeah, we weren't even white. The biggest lynching in
Neither were
U.S.
we,
history was
neither were
against
we.
Italians, not blacks. So,
yeah, there was also a lot of that anti-Irish.
I will admit that. Like,
yeah, the
honestly,
Irish too.
I mean, like, I'm descendant of Italian immigrants, and I hold a strong anti-immigration stance. But it doesn't come from a "fuck the immigrants, they're all awful" kind of point of view. It comes mainly from a American economic and labor independence kind of stance, a cultural unity kind of stance, not from any like obtuse.
It comes from,
to be clear, I'm not in support of like the
you can be against immigrants without being a raging nativist. You can care about your labor having value without being fuck Mexicans. You know what I mean? Like, it's not inherent. It's not always about that.
I know, but it's good to clarify.
You need to be the most egregious of hypocrites. You need to be like some brand new immigrant out of the Middle East who's like a hardcore nativist who's like, get out of my country, go back to your Packy land or whatever,
Yeah.
Go back.
You don't understand how often I see that. I see that so often. I work with a lot of like African immigrants, and they fucking hate Mexicans like crazy. Like, they're like, I came here, I did all the fucking paperwork because I can't just row a boat from Africa to here, and those motherfuckers just came over. You see that? See it forming immediately.
Hold on. We have like 2 Packies in the local area. I'm like getting some fucking food and whatnot. The guy's talking. He goes, "God damn, I hate those goddamn East Indian fucks moving into our country." I'm like, bruh, what the fuck are you?
Yeah, it's like once they get here, they think that they're like better than other like fucking immigrant groups.
I mean, it's just like the lowbrow rhetoric that, like, it turns me off as someone who's kind of desensitized to this shit. It probably turns off normies a lot more.
Yeah, that's why I like the only like actual stance I have is like I want to like end all like mass immigration, because like the entire like capitalist system that the West proposes, like they encourage like mass immigration, but like honestly, like these people, they don't need to like come to these countries. We just need to like let them like have their own lands.
Yeah, stop bombing their fucking countries and making like.
I mean, like, and this is something that.
But where else will the military-industrial complex get the money it needs?
Yeah.
Well, they don't need the money.
Well, I mean, and I was talking with somebody, I can't quite remember who it was about this, and it was very much the reason why so many of these people like immigrate, to Europe or the Americas or wherever the fuck it is because we've so heavily, like, just the West in general, and sometimes the East as well, as just stopped them from developing naturally to the point where they're like, I can't even identify with this. Like, there's no pride in something that they have no control over. We've stripped control from most of these nations around the world. And I know this is probably, a little bit strange coming from an American, but that shit needs to fucking stop. If a country over in in Central Africa wants to fight a brutal, bloody civil war where there's fucking child soldiers, like, yeah, that's awful and horrific and all this humanitarian garbage. But if it's part of that development, it needs to happen. Atrocities happen. Get the fuck over it.
That needs to be flipped there, Evan. Atrocities happen.
Well, it has to be organic development. We can't prop up some sort of African state. It will fail like every other state we've propped up in the Middle East.
Exactly. Like, if to get to a naturally developed state, there needs to be an atrocity, then that's just what's gonna happen. You're not gonna make that place better by preventing it. You're just gonna you're gonna kick the can further down the road till eventually your people back in your nation are so fucking sick and tired of it that they force the soldiers to come back home, and then they're just gonna do it again. It does not end. That cycle is perpetual.
Liberals tend to forget this and tend to forget their own atrocities or try to blame it on someone else.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Abso-fucking-lutely, 100%.
Yeah, they talk about every other bad thing that happened. that like X group did to this group, and it's like, what have y'all done? Look at the bloody revolutions that happened in France, or what happened to like the Native Americans.
Where they executed more people than actually fought in the revolution. Look at the total genocide
Yeah.
of entire populations of people by the people fighting for democracy in most of the Caribbean islands and some portions of South America. I mean,
Or look at the destabilization campaigns in Yugoslavia, Libya, Syria, etc.
Oh, I was really right about to bring up Libya. Yeah, like the democratic, like backed coup that like set that nation to a hell spiral that it's still in.
Fucking eroded anything close to a competent government it had. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, we know that very well here at the Games Life Fisher State. We have Libyan immigrants in the membership rolls.
But anyway, I could rant about the hypocrisy of fucking the liberal West forever.
All right, let's move on to the final point. Point 11. Radical overhaul of the bureaucracy, which today has become an end in itself and a state within the state. And as a result of this, development of regional and municipal autonomy. Devolution of administrative responsibilities and control mechanisms to the region. The aim is to make every administrative body swift acting and efficient, and to reduce the number of employees by 2/3. At the same time, the salaries of heads of departments must be doubled. The selection procedure must be competitive, and practical experience must be a condition of employment. Departmental executives to be given direct and consequential responsibility for the improvement and simplification of everything, cutting out all the dead wood from every administrative body, from the diplomatic service and from all areas of national life. Direct rewards for practical ingenuity and job simplification, reduction in importance of academic qualifications, and encouragement by reward for commercial and industrial initiative, application of the elective principle for positions of major responsibility. Following the industrial model, simplification of organization in the different branches of the executive. So that's point 11. Anti-bureaucracy, which unfortunately I feel did not carry over to the fascist regime. There was a lot of bureaucracy, and
mostly because of the Machiavellian attitude of Mussolini with not wanting to do away with all the old. First off, it caused a lot of the old, long-standing systems to be continued rather than cast away.
When they should have been cast away. Yeah, I think they're
that had to be his biggest failing.
And once again,
his
I do
biggest
think
failing
there
was
is
abandoning Austria.
Pragmatic.
Yeah.
To be fair, the situation was the situation required it at the time, and
didn't
that's
deserve that ending. That
no, he didn't. And CSD makes a good point. It was not necessarily entirely, but it was pretty. It was a very decent realpolitik strategic move. But I think once again, like I made a point earlier in regards to, I think it was some other stance in this manifesto. I can't remember. We've been going for a while. Where I think there's a really good,
right. It feels like we've been here a whole year, hasn't it?
There can be a very good compromise between what happened in fascist Italy and between this particular manifesto of the Futurist political party, where I think in terms of transition, you do need some time where the experienced bureaucrats and all that stuff, you maintain them in occupation so that you can make a swift and functional alteration of government or alteration of policy or bureaucracy. But as soon as their job has fulfilled its duty, you then cut away that excess, the dead wood, like is described in this political manifesto. You utilize them for the transition and then complete that transition with the cutting down of the bureaucracy to only what is necessary for efficient and functional government.
Also, it just seems like, from what I can see from my reading of history, that like for whatever reason, technology just causes mass bureaucracy for whatever reason.
Because
I don't entirely know why. I kind of do know why, because it centralizes everything slowly.
And I kind of know what you're talking about as well. But I think the big thing about it as well is that we use computers in many circumstances, and I know some people who work in bureaucratic environments. We use computers like they use typewriters. Seriously, we do. We just type stuff up on it, print it out. It's all in paper. And I understand a reluctance to go towards digital. It's far more easily accessible until you realize that you can store it off of the hard drive, off of the device itself, leaving it basically unassailable by anything other than direct theft. But regardless, we use modern technology like old technology. So we maintain all the bureaucracy, and then we need to add in more to maintain training and maintenance and the constant updates that hardware that utilizes digital software needs.
Can
It's
confirm.
because of
As someone
it's
who does a lot of paperwork and computer work and still a lot of paperwork and filing, we still do that. In a modern corporate sense.
Yeah, exactly. And it's completely antithetical to the idea of utilizing technology to make these things simpler and more efficient. We are directly complicating the process simply to not go towards a new system to maintain the old. It's that kind of, more traditional mindset that I find absolutely abhorrent. And I think, but it's absolutely something that it needs to change. It has to. Unless you want to keep this massively bloated, 50 times oversized government. And I believe in a very involved, very, I would call almost all-encompassing government. I do. But it cannot be bloated. Otherwise, it simply becomes tyrannical. It must be efficient as well as all-consuming.
We should also be efficient, and you need the best people in positions where they make sense.
Exactly.
The problem with bureaucracy is you have people who don't really deserve to be in the positions they're in,
or positions that exist just to make the jobs of others easier.
Yeah, they don't really value the position or care about it. It's just something they were given. They didn't work hard to obtain it. So, that's what bureaucracy is. It's just it gets in the way of efficiency and building the kind of society that we should strive for. You want the best people in positions, people who really deserve it, people who are really qualified to do those jobs. It's not even just public sector or government. It's just in general, handouts for personal friends or family and shit like that. It clogs things up, and it's frustrating dealing with. We deal with it a lot in liberal countries too.
Yeah, we don't just deal with state bureaucracy. We deal with corporate bureaucrocy too, which is arguably worse in some ways.
I hate that shit. I think it's just a natural response to hate this shit. We all just kind of accept it, and it goes on.
It's part and parcel to that concept that it's just the way things work, right? And it's very much it's antithetical to both futurism and to fascism. The way things work haven't worked, so fucking change it. Don't fucking sit there and say, "Oh no, it's we're used to it." It's no, change it. Don't be an idiot.
These practices are no good, and that's why the world is the way it is right now.
I'll go ahead and say, as someone who has worked in bureaucracy in the both public and private sector, Lord Almighty, the government's a lot worse. I know companies aren't that much better, but just the government's a lot worse.
It's unhinged and rampant in the public sector, and that shit needs to be pushed the fuck out. And I also agree with giving young people an opportunity to actually make something of themselves. All these crusty old boomers occupying positions and never retiring because they don't really do anything. They just sit at a desk all fucking day. Sorry, I'm starting to rant. I've been drinking,
it's 100% agreed. I mean, the thing about it as well is that we've been ranting for the past 6 hours.
3 technically.
Well, yeah, but it feels like 6. But I mean, it's absolutely that thing where there needs to be the infusion of new blood. I would argue every half generation, really. As soon as you can get new blood in,
needs to water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants. That's an American saying.
Yeah, I mean that saying's kind of bogus, but anyway, it has to be something which is constantly revitalized by the infusion of youth. Now, there are certain circumstances where I think, the old should play their part. I think, for example, in my, perfect utopic meritocratic system, If someone does a damn good fucking job and they've been doing that job for years, let them keep doing the fucking job.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
don't restrict the capacity for the youth to advance. But make it so that if the youth do advance, they do so entirely by their own merit, not by the enforced infusion of youth, but by the natural, organic infusion of it.
That's what happened with the Soviet Union when it fell. It was just because a lot of its leaders just got really old and incompetent and just didn't believe in the system
Well, you had
anymore.
all those young Soviet men occupying the White House and shit like that, refusing to exit when the 1993 constitutional crisis.
But that was after the Soviet Union fell. That was when
technically not. It was still in the process of collapsing.
God,
Or when you had the coup attempt, was it 89? I think, where they had
it was 91.
Like, the Soviets, they kept getting old men into power, and they would just die almost at the same rate that we switched out our presidents here in America. It was crazy. It's just nothing but old men. No wonder it collapsed.
I could be wrong on this, but Brezhnev around the end of his rule was on a ventilator half the time, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't know enough about Soviet leaders to say one way or the other. I think what does need to happen in regards to the system is it be almost mandatory that those who are in positions of power build up and educate the youth. Not those directly below them, but the youth seeking to enter into that profession. Almost a mentorship system, but not quite exactly. More just the information of those who are about to retire, or those who are retired even, is passed on to the youth so that there's a constant infusion not only of ideals, but an infusion of youth at the same time. You infuse the youth with the ideas, and then you infuse the apparatus into which they're entering, the occupational field, with their youth. This kind of feedback loop of intelligence and youth, constantly feeding into the system, constantly renewing it, constantly bringing it life.
For sure. Salute to Lord Dark. Yeah, you weren't very chatty, so I brought CSD on. Salute though. Everybody should go to BitChute and sub to Third Position Radio. They run a good program. Shout out to Weaponized Goebbels. Shout out to Evan and the American Reformation Front. Shout out to Seamus and the Seamusite Fascisti. All these dudes are putting in good work and trying to build a tangible IRL movement, trying to do things for their communities. It's not just totally internet based. And, I don't have delusions about what Futurism Forever is. We're an art podcast. We delve into politics. It's impossible to talk about futurism without talking about the politics that surrounded it or the political implications of it. Because Marinetti did have political ambitions, but the emphasis is on art. This was probably our most overtly political episode thus far, but I think it's been good. I'm going to read the conclusion, and then we'll wrap up, and I'll give you guys all a chance to promote yourselves and where people can find you. But anyway, the Futurist political party that we are founding today will be entirely separate from the Futurist art movement. This latter will continue in its modernization and strengthening of the creative Italian genius. The Futurist art movement, the avant-garde of Italian artistic sensibility, is of course always some way ahead of the slowly changing sensibilities of the people. It is therefore an avant-garde that is often misunderstood and often opposed by the majority, who cannot understand its amazing discoveries, the brutal directness of its polemical expression, and the fearless leaps of its intuitions. The Futurist political party, on the other hand, senses present needs and interprets the very frame of mind of the entire race precisely in its purgative revolutionary impulse. All Italians can belong to the Futurist political party. Men and women of all classes and ages, regardless of whether or not they have any notions whatsoever about art or literature. The political program signals the birth of the Futurist political party, called into being by all those Italians who today are fighting for a more youthful Italy, freed from the millstones of the past and of foreigners. We shall sustain the political program with the elan and courage that hitherto have characterized the futurist movement in the theaters and piazzas, and everyone in Italy and abroad knows what we mean by elan and courage. So that concludes the Futurist Manifesto of the Futurist Political Party. Thanks, Evan, Seamus, Third Position Radio, and the FF regulars who came on. We appreciate all you guys. Evan, where can the audience find you and American Reformation Front?
So, for those listening, you can find us at our official website, AmericanReformationFront.org. You can find us over Twitter, Instagram. We have a recently updated Gab, and soon to come, our website will be filled with articles, and there'll be videos over Odyssey, BitChute, and YouTube, presenting our views both on the modern era, our ideological views, and some historical documentation about our movement. Hope to see you within the front soon.
Seamus, where can the audience find you guys?
Yeah, you guys can find us at SeamusIteFascistI.org, or any of our Twitter handles and whatnot. These go by Seamusite, but you can probably Google us with just that. Yeah, hope to see you there, boys.
All right, salute. And Weaponized Goebbels.
Well, you can find us. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Weaponized Gallery. You can find Dark on Twitter as well. He's Lord Dark, and our BitChute account, Third Position Radio 2, all underscores instead of spaces. And yeah, I hope to see you guys all soon. Everyone here, you're all welcome to be guests on the podcast. I loved the conversations we had here.
Oh yeah, anytime, Weaponized Girl. Just hit me up. I'll make sure to make some time for you.
You guys should have Evan on soon. I've been on twice. I don't think Evan's been on yet, so have Evan on. He's a good dude. And CSD, you've got a blog.
Yeah, you can just find me at the syndicalistpapers.wordpress. So I also have a Telegram channel by the same name too.
Hey, salute. On that note, this episode has been long. I'm kind of burnt out and tired. We would have talked about like the closing remarks, but I think we'll just leave it as is.
Yeah, we made plenty of remarks already.
All right. Thanks for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening. We're going to be doing an interview with Ben de Villiers tomorrow that we're super excited about. He's like a contemporary sculptor who's directly inspired by futurism, by vorticism, by like Russian constructivism. So it's like right up our alley, and like he covers a lot of the same ground that we cover on this podcast. So we're super looking forward to that. And yeah, we hope to see you guys there. We'll be doing that earlier than normal because of time zone differences. But I'll let you guys all know on social media tomorrow. Anyway, salute. Keep fighting the good fight. Live fast, die young. Peace.